You're not half the man my 16-year-old son is. My father-in-law humiliated me in front of my wife and our child, calling me useless, and they all laughed. What they never knew is that I was the CEO who secretly paid his salary for 8 years. You're not half the man my 16-year-old son is, my wife's rich father said during dinner. I pushed my chair back and replied, then he can start paying your salary because you're fired. My wife's dad froze. Marcus, my wife asked. Miranda, what salary? The rain had started that morning. Not the dramatic kind that announces itself with thunder, but the quiet, persistent kind that seeps into everything. The kind of rain that makes you wonder if the sky has forgotten how to stop crying. I was standing by the window of our house, watching the drops run down the glass, and I didn't know yet that this would be the last day I'd feel small in my own home. My wife Miranda was in the kitchen with her mother Diane, preparing what they called an informal family dinner. There was nothing informal about it. Informal didn't require 3 types of wine, hand-ironed tablecloths, or the particular way Diane looked at me as if I were a stain on her daughter's otherwise perfect life. But over the years I'd learned to swallow those things, to smile, to nod, to be grateful, they said, for being welcomed into their world. Their world, not ours, never ours. Richard Blackwood, my father-in-law, arrived at exactly 6:30 because Richard Blackwood wasn't late and he certainly wasn't early. He was precise, he was calculated. He did everything with that kind of confidence that comes from never being told no. Not really, not in any way that mattered. Marcus, he said, barely making eye contact as he handed his coat to Miranda. Not to me, never to me. Richard. I extended my hand anyway, as I always did, and he shook it the way you might touch something you're not entirely sure is clean. Dinner was salmon, pan-seared, because Miranda knew her father liked it that way, with asparagus and some kind of potato preparation that had probably taken hours to look simple. I'd offered to help cook. I always offered, but Diane had smiled that smile, the one that seemed kind if you didn't know better, and said, "Oh, Marcus, why don't you just relax? You've had such a long day." I hadn't. I'd had a normal day, a good day actually. But in the Blackwood family, it was always assumed that my days were harder, longer, and more exhausting than they really were, because I was the one who still worked for someone else. I was the one who still hadn't made it, whatever that meant in their language of country clubs and investment portfolios. We sat down, and for the first 20 minutes, everything was fine. Fine in the way a performance is fine when everyone remembers their lines. Richard talked about the market. Diane mentioned a charity gala. Miranda laughed at the appropriate intervals, and I nodded, contributing just enough to show I was paying attention, but not so much as to risk saying the wrong thing. Then Richard turned to our son Cameron. Cameron was 16, and if I'm honest, he was everything I'd hoped he would be at that age. Smart, curious, athletic enough to make the varsity soccer team, but humble enough not to make that his whole personality. He had Miranda's eyes, and, I like to think, my sense of humor, though lately he'd been testing the boundaries like teenagers do, pushing to see where the walls were. So, Cameron, Richard said, cutting his salmon with surgical precision. Your mother tells me you've been looking at colleges. Cameron nodded with a little too much eagerness. He'd always wanted his grandfather's approval, and I understood that. Richard was magnetic the way powerful people often are. When he focused on you, he really focused. It felt like being chosen. Yes, sir. I'm thinking maybe business school or economics. Richard's face lit up. It really lit up. It was the first genuine smile I'd seen from him all night. Outstanding. Outstanding. You know, Cameron, the world needs men who understand how money works. Real men. Men who build things, who create value, not just collect paychecks. The room got quieter. Not silent. The rain outside made sure of that. But quieter in the way that matters. The way that makes your pulse visible in your throat. I kept my eyes on my plate. I'd heard variations of this speech before. Richard had a way of talking about real men and creating value that somehow always ended up being about everything I wasn't. I was a project manager at a mid-sized tech company. I made good money. Not Blackwood money, but good money. We lived well. Cameron went to a private school. Miranda didn't have to work, though she chose to, managing a boutique art gallery downtown. But to Richard, I was the employee class. The way he was absorbing this narrative that some men build and other men just exist in the buildings. Miranda touched my hand under the table, a small gesture that could have been solidarity or could have been a warning to stay calm. I couldn't tell the difference anymore. We'd been married for 18 years, and somewhere along the way her touches had become harder to read. Of course, Richard continued. It takes a certain kind of drive, a certain kind of backbone. Not everyone has it. Some people are content to let others take the risks, make the decisions, carry the weight. They're happy to show up, do what they're told, and go home. Nothing wrong with that. I suppose the world needs worker bees. Worker bees. I felt something shift in my chest, like a door I'd been holding shut had just been nudged open a little. But you, Cameron, Richard pointed at my son with his fork. You have something different. I can see it. You have that hunger, that intelligence. You remind me of myself at your age. Cameron beamed, literally beamed. And I watched my son, this boy I'd stayed up with through nightmares, science projects, and teenage heartbreaks. Look at his grandfather like he was receiving a blessing from a king. Thanks, Grandpa. That means a lot. Of course it does, because you know what real success looks like. You've seen it. Richard made a vague gesture around our dining room, which was beautiful, because Miranda had made it beautiful, not because of anything the Blackwoods had contributed. You understand that a man provides, a man builds. A man doesn't just coast. The word was left hanging there. Coast. Dad, Miranda said softly. Finally, maybe we could talk about something else. I'm just being honest, darling. The boy should know what's possible when you apply yourself, when you don't settle for Richard, Diane cut in, her voice with that particular tone of tired warning that meant he was approaching a line even she wouldn't defend. But Richard wasn't stopping. He'd had 2 glasses of wine, and wine always made him bolder, more willing to say the things he usually only implied. I'm serious, Cameron. You're 16, and I already see more potential in you than I've seen in, and he stopped. He caught himself, but too late. We all knew where that sentence was going. The rain got louder. Or maybe it was just that no one was talking anymore. I looked up from my plate. Richard was looking at me now, really looking at me with that expression that was half challenge, half curiosity, as if he were wondering what I'd do. If I'd do anything at all more potential than who? Richard, I heard myself ask. My voice was quiet, too quiet. The kind of calm that comes right before something breaks. Marcus, Miranda said, squeezing my hand tighter now. Definitely a warning. No, it's okay. I'd like to hear the end of that sentence. I looked at my father-in-law, this man who'd spent nearly 2 decades making me feel like an intruder in my own marriage, and I waited. Richard put down his fork slowly, deliberately. He straightened in his chair, and I could see him making a calculation, deciding whether to retreat or advance. He chose to advance. I'll be honest with you, Marcus, since we're all family here. Cameron is 16, and he already has more drive, more ambition, more of an understanding of what it takes to be successful than you've shown in all the years I've known you. He's already more of a man than you are. The words landed like stones dropping into still water. Dad, Miranda's voice was sharp now, angry. But Richard held up a hand. I'm not being cruel, Miranda. I'm being truthful. Someone needs to say it. Your husband is a nice man. He's reliable. He's okay. But okay isn't excellence. Okay isn't leadership. Okay is what people settle for when they don't have the courage to be great. Cameron was staring at his plate. He wasn't smiling anymore, sensing something had gone wrong, but not quite sure how. Diane had her hand over her mouth, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years, maybe ever. It was clarity, pure, crystal clarity, as if the rain had finally washed away something that had been clouding my vision. You're right, I said quietly. Richard blinked. He hadn't expected agreement. I'm right about one thing. Someone did need to say something. Someone did need to be truthful. I pushed my chair back, stood slowly, and looked at this man who'd spent 18 years treating me like hired help in my own life. So let me be truthful now. Richard, you're fired. The room went still. Really still. Even the rain seemed to hold its breath. I'm sorry. Richard's face was doing something complicated. Confusion and amusement were fighting for dominance. You're fired with immediate effect. Consider this your notice. Marcus, what are you? Miranda started, but I held up my hand gently the way Richard had to her. Fired from what exactly? Richard was smiling now. The way you smile at a child who said something absurd. What are you talking about? From your salary, Richard. From the position you've held for the last 8 years. The position I've apparently been paying you for while you sit here and tell me I'm not enough of a man. The smile slowly faded like melting ice. Salary? What salary? And there it was, the perfect, beautiful question I'd been waiting for him to ask. even though I hadn't known I was waiting until this exact moment. I walked to the small home office off our dining room. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk and pulled out a folder I'd honestly forgotten was there. Not forgotten, I knew it was there, but I'd stopped thinking about it. It was just background noise. Another line item, another thing that got paid automatically every month for so long it stopped registering as real. I walked back to the table and placed the folder in front of Richard. "Open it," I said. He didn't move. He was staring at the folder like it might bite him. "Richard," I said again. "Softer now. Open it." His hand trembled slightly as he did. Inside were 8 years of pay stubs, contract renewals, and direct deposit receipts. All in the name of Richard Blackwood. All signed by me. All for a consulting position he'd held at my company. My company, the one I'd founded 3 years before Cameron was born, the one Richard thought was just another place where I collected a check because I'd never corrected him, because Miranda had asked me not to make a big deal about it, because it seemed easier to let him think I was small, but I wasn't the project manager, I was the CEO. And Richard Blackwood, this man who'd just told his grandson he was more of a man than me, had been on my payroll since the company went public 8 years ago in a position I'd created specifically to give him dignity after his own business quietly collapsed. "That's impossible," Richard whispered, but his face said he knew it wasn't. $100,000 a year, I said calmly. Plus bonuses, plus stock options that vested last year. You're welcome to check with your accountant. I assume you've been cashing the checks. Diane made a small sound, something between a gasp and a sob. Cameron was looking at me like he'd never seen me before. And Miranda was staring at the folder, then at her father, then at me with her mouth open with no sound coming out. "You've been paying him," she finally managed to say. All this time. I confirmed. I wanted to help. Your father had fallen on hard times. The consulting role was real enough. He attended meetings, he gave advice when asked, but it was mostly about making sure you stayed afloat, giving him something to hold on to. I turned back to Richard, who'd gone very pale. "But here's the thing about consulting positions, Richard. They're conditional. They're based on mutual respect. And after tonight, after listening to you tell my 16-year-old son that he's already more of a man than his father, after watching you try to teach him that success means stepping on people who've done nothing but support you." I paused. I let the rain fill the silence. "I've decided we no longer require your services." Richard opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Marcus, I didn't know." "No, you didn't know. That was the problem. You didn't know because you never asked. You just assumed. You assumed I was small because it made you feel big. You assumed I was weak because you needed someone to be weaker than you." I looked at Cameron, who was crying now quietly, and I felt something break and rebuild in my chest simultaneously. "But you were wrong, Richard, and more importantly, you were wrong in front of my son. You tried to teach him that being a man means what you have, what you own, who you can belittle. So yes, you're fired. And since Cameron is apparently already more of a man than me, maybe he can start covering that $180,000 a year for you." The silence that followed was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. Richard stood slowly with his hands still on the folder, his face a map of emotions I couldn't and didn't particularly care to read. "I should go," he said finally. "Yes," I agreed, "you should." He looked at Miranda, maybe hoping she would defend him, fix this somehow, but she was just looking at me, and I couldn't tell if what I saw in her eyes was betrayal or revelation. Richard walked to the door. Diane followed him, whispering something I couldn't hear, and then they were gone. And it was just the three of us, me, Miranda, and Cameron, sitting at a table full of cold salmon and broken assumptions. Cameron spoke first. "Dad, is it true about the company?" "Yes. Why didn't you tell me?" I looked at my son, this boy becoming a man, and I tried to figure out how to explain that sometimes you make yourself smaller because you think it will make the people you love more comfortable. That sometimes silence feels like kindness, that sometimes you let people underestimate you because the correction seems like cruelty. But standing there with the rain still falling and the echo of Richard's words still hanging in the air, I realized I didn't have a good answer. "I don't know," I said honestly, "but I'm sorry you deserve to know." Miranda hadn't moved, hadn't spoken. She was still staring at the folder like it was written in a language she just learned existed. "Miranda," I said gently. She looked at me, and I saw something in her face I hadn't seen in years. Uncertainty. For 18 years, she'd known exactly who I was in relation to her family. I was the acceptable choice, the nice man, the one who wasn't quite enough, but who loved her anyway. Now she was looking at me like I was a stranger. And maybe I was. Maybe we both were. We need to talk, she said finally. Yes, I agreed, we do. But not that night. That night the rain kept falling, and somewhere in the house I could hear Cameron crying in his room. And everything that had been solid for 18 years was suddenly liquid, reforming itself into shapes I didn't yet recognize. I looked out the window into the rain, and I thought about Richard driving home, probably calling his accountant, probably realizing for the first time just how many things he'd gotten wrong. And I thought about tomorrow, about all the tomorrows. That would be different now, because the thing about doors, I was learning, is that once you stop holding them shut, you can't control what comes in. The rain kept falling, and everything changed. It didn't stop. It continued through the night, steady and relentless, as if the universe had decided to score the dissolution of my carefully constructed life with its own percussion. I sat in my home office, the same room where I'd retrieved that folder, that evidence of a kindness that had been mistaken for weakness, and listened to the water drum against the windows while everything I thought I knew rearranged itself into new configurations. Miranda had gone upstairs without a good night. I heard her footsteps pause outside Cameron's door. I heard the soft murmur of voices, but I couldn't make out the words. Maybe she was comforting him. Maybe she was trying to understand what had just happened. Maybe she was calling her father, apologizing, trying to smooth the jagged edges I'd just created in her family's carefully maintained facade. I didn't go up to find out. For the first time in our marriage, I didn't follow her to explain, to apologize, to make myself smaller, so she could feel bigger. I sat in my leather chair, the expensive one Miranda had bought me 3 Christmases ago, saying, every executive needs a proper office, even if they sometimes work from home. And I let the weight of the night settle on me like sediment. Executive, she knew. Of course she knew. You don't stay married to someone for 18 years and not know what they do for a living. But knowing and acknowledging are different countries, separated by an ocean of implications neither of us had wanted to cross. Around midnight, I heard Cameron's door open. His footsteps on the stairs were tentative in the way they used to be when he was small and had nightmares, checking to see if I was still awake, if it was safe to need something. He appeared in my office doorway backlit by the hall light, and for a moment, he looked exactly as he had at 6 years old. Uncertain, searching, wanting the reassurance that the world still made sense. Can't sleep? I asked, though it wasn't really a question. He shook his head and came in, folding himself into the chair opposite my desk in the way he did when we had our serious conversations, the ones about grades or girls or the future, which always felt both too close and impossibly far away. Dad, he began, then stopped. He started again. Was Grandpa right about me being more of a man than you? The question hung there, vulnerable and terrible, and I realized this was the real damage Richard had done. Not to my ego, I could survive his opinion, but to Cameron, who now had to reconcile the grandfather he'd admired with the cruelty that admiration had been built on. Do you think he was right? I asked instead of answering. Cameron looked at his hands, these hands that were getting bigger every day, that would someday be fully grown, capable of building or destroying in ways he couldn't yet imagine. I don't know. I mean, before tonight, I thought you were just a project manager. I thought we were like comfortable, but not rich. I thought Grandpa was the successful one, the one who had it all figured out. He looked up at me, and his eyes were red from crying. Why did you let me think that? It was the same question Miranda would ask, had probably been asking herself all night. Why did you let us think you were less than you are? Because, I said slowly, trying to find words that were true without being cruel. Your grandfather needed to believe he was still the powerful one. After his business failed, after he lost most of what he'd built, he needed to feel like he was still the man who raised your mother, still the patriarch, still someone worth looking up to. So you lied. No, I just didn't correct his assumptions. There's a difference. Cameron frowned, processing this distinction in the way only a 16-year-old can, seeing both the logic and the betrayal simultaneously. But you let him treat you like you were nothing. You let him talk down to you. All those dinners, all those comments about real men and building things, you just sat there and took it. I did. Why? This was the question I'd been avoiding all night, maybe for years. Why had I let Richard Blackwood belittle me? Why had I paid him to keep his dignity while he systematically stripped mine away? Because I loved your mother, I said finally. And she loved her father, and it seemed like a small price to pay, letting him feel superior, letting him believe I was less successful than I am. If it meant keeping the peace in the family, if it meant you could have a grandfather who took you to ball games and taught you to fish and made you feel special. But he wasn't being a good grandfather. He was teaching me to look down on you. The words cut deeper than Richard's had. Maybe because they were true, maybe because they came from my son, maybe because they named the thing I'd been trying not to see. Yes, I admitted, he was, and I allowed it because I thought I was being noble. I thought I was being the bigger person, but tonight when he said that to you, when he tried to make you believe that your worth as a man is measured by how much you have and who you can belittle, I paused. I felt something sharp in my throat. I realized I wasn't protecting you by staying quiet. I was teaching you that it's okay to let people treat you as less than you are. That love means making yourself small. Cameron was crying again, quietly, the way men are taught to cry when they're trying not to. I don't want to be like him, he whispered, like Grandpa. I don't want to be someone who needs other people to be small so I can feel big. I got up from my chair and went to him. I hugged him the way I used to when he was little and the world had scraped his knees or broken his heart in those small, temporary ways. You won't be, I said into his hair, which was getting long, which smelled of the expensive shampoo he'd started using since he'd noticed girls noticing him. You're already better than that. You're already the man your grandfather was afraid he'd never be. We stood like that for a while, father and son, holding on to each other, while the rain continued its endless conversation with the windows, and the night stretched out like a question neither of us could yet answer. When Cameron finally pulled away, he wiped his eyes on the back of his hand and tried to smile. So are you really rich? Like really successful? I laughed. I couldn't help it. Because leave it to a teenager to cut through the existential crisis with practical curiosity. I do okay. The company's done well. Better than okay. Actually, we went public 8 years ago, and the stock's been solid. We're not billionaires, but we're comfortable. More than comfortable, Cameron said. And it wasn't quite a question. Yes, more than comfortable. He nodded, absorbing this, and I could see him recalculating everything. Our house, our cars, the vacations we took, the private school he attended, all of it reframing itself in the light of this new information. Mom knows. I mean, really knows. She knows what I do. She's always known, but we never talked about it explicitly. She never asked for specifics, and I never offered them. It was just easier that way. Easier for who, Dad? Smart kid. Too smart. Maybe for her own comfort. For everyone, I thought. For her, because she didn't have to choose between her father's version of reality and mine. For me, because I didn't have to be the bad guy who corrected him. For your grandfather, because he got to keep his dignity. But what about your dignity, Dad? The question landed like a punch, and I realized my 16-year-old son had just articulated what I'd been unable to see for years, that in trying to preserve everyone else's dignity, I'd been systematically giving away my own. I didn't think about it, I said honestly. I should have, but I didn't. Cameron stood, stretched in that way teenagers do, all limbs and growing bones, still figuring out how to inhabit a body that kept changing. I'm going to try to sleep, he said. But Dad, thanks for standing up tonight, for standing up for yourself, for standing up for us. He left before I could answer, and I was alone again with the rain and the dark and the question of what came next. Around 2 a.m., I heard Miranda's footsteps on the stairs. She appeared in the doorway where Cameron had been hours before, but her presence was different, heavier, more complicated, freighted with 18 years of marriage and the secrets we'd both kept. You're still up, she said. It wasn't quite an accusation, but it wasn't quite neutral either. I couldn't sleep. She came in and sat in the chair Cameron had vacated, and I noticed she was wearing the robe I'd bought her for our 10th anniversary. Soft cashmere, deep blue, expensive, in a way that had felt extravagant then, but seemed almost quaint now, given what I apparently could have afforded. I spoke to my father, she said, and I waited because there was more to come and I knew better than to interrupt. He's devastated, humiliated. He didn't know, Marcus, about the money, about the consulting position. He thought it was real. It was real. He did the work when there was work to be done, but it was charity. You created a position for him, so he could save face after everything fell apart. Yes. Why didn't you tell me? This was the question I'd been dreading, the one with more weight than all of Richard's insults combined. Because he was hurting, I said carefully. When your father's business collapsed, when he lost everything, you were so worried about him, about what it would do to his pride, to his sense of self. And I had the ability to help, to give him a soft landing, so I did. But I knew if I told you, you'd feel obligated to refuse it on his behalf. You'd say it was too much, that we couldn't afford it, that it wasn't appropriate. So I just did it, and then it became a habit. Another thing we didn't talk about. Miranda was quiet for a long time, her hands folded in her lap, her face hard to read in the dim light of the desk lamp. We don't talk about a lot of things, do we? She said finally. No, we don't. Like how successful you really are, like what you're really worth, like the fact that I've been treating you as the junior partner in this marriage. She trailed off searching for words. When you've been carrying us all. I never felt like I was carrying anyone. I was just doing what I thought was right. By letting my father belittle you. By letting him think he was superior when you were paying his salary. Marcus, that's not noble. She struggled with the word. That's dishonest. The accusation hurt because it was true. I had been dishonest, not in what I'd said, but in what I'd allowed to go unsaid. You're right, I admitted. I should have been honest with you, with Richard, with Cameron. I should have set boundaries years ago, but I told myself I was being kind, that I was keeping the peace, that it didn't matter what Richard thought of me as long as everyone was happy. But everyone wasn't happy. Marcus, you weren't happy. Was I happy? I'd been so focused on maintaining the equilibrium, on making sure everyone else was comfortable, that I hadn't asked myself that question in years. No, I said slowly, I wasn't. I told myself I was okay, that being underestimated was a small price to pay for family harmony. But tonight, when Richard said that to Cameron, when he tried to poison my son against me, I felt the anger again, fresh and sharp. I realized my silence wasn't protecting anyone. It was just teaching Cameron that self-erasure is love. Miranda got up and walked to the window, staring out at the rain that had been falling for hours and showed no signs of stopping. I didn't know, she said to her reflection in the glass. About any of it. About how much you'd sacrificed. About how small we'd all made you feel. I thought we had a comfortable life, that you had a good job, that we were lucky to have my parents' support when we needed it. You had my support. You always had it. I just let your father take the credit because it seemed easier. She turned to face me, and in the lamplight I could see tears on her face. My father called you weak tonight in front of our son, and I didn't defend you. I told you to let it go, not to make a scene. I chose his comfort over your dignity. Miranda, no, let me finish. I've been complicit in this, Marcus. All these years I've let him treat you as if you were somehow lucky to be part of our family, as if you were the one who should be grateful. And I never questioned it because it was comfortable for me, because it meant I didn't have to choose between my husband and my father. She came back to the desk, leaned against it, and looked at me with something that might have been seeing me clearly for the first time. Who are you? She asked. And the question was so genuinely curious, so utterly vulnerable, that it broke something in my chest. Who are you really? Because I thought I was married to a project manager who made decent money and loved me enough to put up with my difficult family. But that's not who you are, is it? I'm still the man you married, I said. I'm still the person who loves you, who loves Cameron, who would do anything for this family. The job title doesn't change that, but it changes everything else. It changes the power dynamic. It changes who's been supporting who. It changes. She stopped, pressed her fingers to her temples. God, Marcus, you've been supporting my parents for 8 years, and I never knew. What does that make me? What kind of wife doesn't know that about her own husband? The kind who trusted me to handle things. The kind who had her own life, her own career, her own concerns. You're not responsible for not knowing what I deliberately didn't tell you, but I should have asked. I should have been curious. I should have paid more attention instead of just accepting the narrative my father built, where he was the successful one and you were. What? The acceptable choice, the safe choice. The words hurt because they were what I'd suspected she believed, what I'd let her believe because the correction seemed like ego. Is that how you saw me? I asked. As the safe choice? Miranda looked at me for a long moment, and I could see her wrestling with honesty, with kindness, with the terrible space where those two things don't quite meet. Sometimes she admitted, not always, not at first. When we met, when we fell in love, you were everything I wanted. Smart and funny and kind. But over the years, as my father kept making those comments, kept comparing you to men he thought were more successful, more ambitious, more something. I started to wonder if I'd settled, if I'd chosen comfort over excitement, if I'd married you because it was safe, instead of because you were exceptional. The admission sat between us like a heavy, unmovable stone. And now I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. Now I don't know what to think. Now I'm learning that you're this whole other person I never quite saw, who's been exceptional all along, and I've been too blind or too comfortable or too influenced by my father to recognize it. She was crying openly now, and I wanted to comfort her, to tell her it was okay, to make it better in the way I always had. But something stopped me, a new understanding that making it better for her might mean making it worse for me. And I was tired of that equation. I need time, she said finally. Time to process this. Time to figure out what this means for us. What do you think it means? I don't know. I don't know if I'm angry that you lied by omission or embarrassed that I never asked. I don't know if I'm hurt that you didn't trust me with the truth or grateful that you protected my father's dignity. I don't know who I've been married to or who I've been in this marriage. She moved to the door, then stopped. For what it's worth, I'm glad you stood up for yourself tonight. I'm glad you stopped making yourself small. I just wish. She trailed off. Wish what? I wish you'd done it sooner, before we all got so used to you being less than you are. Before that became the foundation everything else was built on. She left, and I was alone again with the rain and the ruins of a peace I'd spent 18 years maintaining. Somewhere in the house, a clock struck 3. The rain was still falling, and I sat in my expensive chair in my home office, in a house I'd paid for, in a life I'd built. And I wondered what came next. The truth, I was learning, doesn't just set you free. First, it burns down everything you thought you knew, and then, if you're lucky, it shows you what's worth rebuilding from the ashes. The rain fell harder, and I let it. The dawn came grudgingly, the sky shifting from black to gray without ever quite committing to light. The rain had finally stopped around 4, leaving behind that particular silence that feels louder than noise. The kind that makes you aware of every breath, every heartbeat, every small sound that usually gets lost in the static of daily life. I hadn't slept. I'd sat in my office watching the night turn into morning, thinking about all the versions of myself I'd played over the years, the grateful son-in-law, the adequate husband, the invisible provider, the man who'd learned to make himself so small he'd almost disappeared entirely. Around 6:30, I heard Cameron's alarm go off, then the shower running, the sounds of normal life resuming, as if the world hadn't fundamentally rearranged itself the night before. I envied him, that teenage ability to wake up and just keep going, to process catastrophe through the simple momentum of routine. I needed coffee, more than needed it. I required it the way you require oxygen or truth or some solid ground to stand on when everything else has turned to liquid. The kitchen was exactly as we'd left it. The dinner plates still on the table, the salmon congealed on plates no one had bothered to clear. It looked like the aftermath of something. A party gone wrong, a celebration interrupted, a last supper before an execution. I started cleaning it mechanically, scraping food into the disposal, loading the dishwasher, wiping down surfaces that didn't really need wiping. Busy work. The kind of tasking that lets your hands move while your mind processes things too big to think about directly. I was pouring my second cup of coffee when Miranda came down. She was dressed for work, tailored slacks, silk blouse, the armor of professional competence she wore when she needed to feel in control. Her eyes were puffy, her makeup careful, but not quite hiding the evidence of a sleepless night. "You're up early," she said, which was a ridiculous thing to say, given that neither of us had slept. But sometimes you need ridiculous things to break the ice of impossible conversations. "I never went to bed." She nodded, poured her own coffee, added cream with the same precise measure she always used. Exactly 1 tablespoon, no more, no less. Some things don't change, even when everything else does. "I called in sick," she said to the gallery. I can't pretend to care about art sales today." Probably wise. We stood there. These two people who'd shared a bed for 18 years, who'd created a life together, who'd built something that was supposed to be permanent, and we couldn't figure out how to occupy the same kitchen. Cameron saved us by appearing in the doorway with his backpack slung over one shoulder, looking determinately normal. "I'm leaving for school," he announced to no one in particular. "Cam," Miranda began. "We should probably talk about I'm fine, Mom." "Really?" I just need to think, and I think best when I'm doing normal things. He looked at me, and something passed between us. Some understanding that sometimes you process things by not processing them, by just moving forward until your brain catches up to your life. You have practice after school? I asked because that was normal. That was the kind of question fathers ask sons when the world is coming apart, but still spinning. Yeah, coach wants us to run drills for the game on Friday. He paused. Are you coming to the game? The question had weight. It wasn't really about soccer. Of course, I never miss your games. I know. I just wanted to make sure. He hoisted his backpack higher and headed for the door. Then he stopped. Dad, are you going to tell people about the company? About being the CEO. It was the question I'd been asking myself all night. Was I going to step out of the shadows I'd been hiding in? Was I going to stop playing small? I don't know yet, I admitted. Why? Cameron shrugged, trying to seem casual and almost pulling it off. Just wondering, like, if people at school ask why Grandpa's being weird or whatever, should I tell them the truth? Tell them what you're comfortable with. It's your story too. He nodded and left, and I heard his car start. The used Honda Civic he'd bought himself with money from his summer job, insisting on earning it rather than asking me to buy him something nicer. Good kid, better than I deserved. Maybe, given how I'd modeled self-erasure for him. Miranda was watching me over the rim of her coffee cup. What are you going to do? She asked. About what? About everything. About my father. About us. About this. She gestured vaguely at the space between us. Whatever this is now. I put my coffee cup down and looked at my wife. I really looked at her in the morning light that was finally starting to filter through the windows. She looked tired, uncertain, older than she'd looked yesterday, as if the revelation had aged her overnight. I'm going to the office, I said. I have meetings, a board call at 10, an investor presentation at 2. Normal CEO things. The words tasted strange in my mouth, naming the thing I'd been for years, but never said out loud in this house. You're just going to go to work like nothing happened. Something happened, Miranda. Something big, but I still have responsibilities, people who depend on me, a company to run. That doesn't stop because my father-in-law finally knows the truth. She flinched at the sharpness in my tone, and I felt a pang of guilt. Then I pushed it away. I was done with automatic guilt, with reflexive apologies, with making myself softer so other people could remain comfortable. I didn't mean, she started. I know what you meant. You meant I should stay here and manage the emotional fallout, smooth things over, fix what I broke. Make everyone feel better about the fact that I finally stopped pretending to be less than I am. That's not fair, is it, Miranda? We've been married for 18 years, and you didn't know what I do for a living. Not really, you didn't ask, and I didn't tell. And we both participated in this fiction where your family was supporting us instead of the other way around. That's not just on me. She put her coffee cup down with enough force that a little bit sloshed over the side. Don't you dare make this about me not asking. You actively concealed it. You created a whole false narrative. I didn't create anything. I just didn't correct your father's assumptions. There's a difference. Is there? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you lied to me for our entire marriage. The accusation hung between us, sharp and cutting, and I felt something shift in my chest. The door closing or maybe opening. I couldn't tell which. You know what, Miranda? Maybe I did. Maybe I lied by letting you think I was smaller than I am. But you lied too. You lied when you let your father belittle me at every family dinner and didn't say a word. You lied when you let him teach our son that I wasn't enough of a man. You lied when you chose your father's comfort over my dignity. Every single time. Her face went pale, then red, and I could see the anger building, the defensive walls going up. I was trying to keep the peace. I was trying to maintain family harmony at my expense, always at my expense. And I let you because I loved you, because I thought that's what love was. Sacrifice and silence, and making yourself smaller so the people you love can feel bigger. That's not what love is to me, she said, but her voice was quieter now, uncertain. Then what is it, Miranda? What is love to you? Because I need to know if we're going to figure out what comes next. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. No words came out. After 18 years of marriage, my wife couldn't tell me what love meant to her. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. I need to get ready for work, I said. Finally, we can continue this later or not. Whatever you need. I left her standing in the kitchen and went upstairs to shower and change. And I didn't look back to see if she was crying, because I wasn't sure I could handle it if she was. and I wasn't sure I could handle it yet if she wasn't. The office was downtown, a sleek building with glass walls and my company's name, Meridian Solutions, etched in steel letters by the entrance. I'd started it 12 years ago, 3 years before Cameron was born, with 2 employees and a dream that felt impossible at the time. Now we had 300 employees in 4 cities, contracts with half the Fortune 500, and a stock price that had made everyone who believed in us early on very, very comfortable. I pulled into my reserved spot, CEO stenciled on the concrete, and sat in my car for a moment, looking up at this thing I had built, this empire I had created while pretending to be a project manager at family dinners. My phone buzzed. A text from Richard. "We need to talk. This is unacceptable." I looked at the words, the audacity of them, the way he'd somehow made himself the victim in a situation where he'd been systematically insulting me for years while I paid his bills. I deleted the text without replying and got out of the car. My assistant, Jennifer, looked up as I stepped off the elevator. She was in her late 50s, terrifyingly competent, and had been with me since year 2. She knew everything about the company and almost nothing about my personal life, which was exactly how I preferred it. "Morning, Marcus. You look terrible." "Thanks, Jennifer. Your brutal honesty is why I pay you the big bucks." She smiled, but there was concern in her eyes. "Rough night. You could say that. What's on the docket?" She handed me my printed schedule because I still preferred paper for some things and ran through the day. Board call at 10, investor presentation at 2, department head meeting at 4, dinner with a potential client at 7, which I'd forgotten about and now regretted. "Can we reschedule the dinner?" I asked. "Tried already. They fly out tomorrow. It's tonight or never." "Fine, tonight it is." I went into my office and closed the door. I leaned against it for a moment, letting the familiar space ground me. This was where I was safe. This was where I knew exactly who I was and what I was worth. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Richard. "Marcus, we're family. We need to discuss this like adults." I almost laughed. Adults. As if he'd been acting like an adult when he told my son I wasn't man enough. As if any of his behavior for the last 18 years had been adult. I texted back. I said what I wanted to say. "You're fired. The paperwork will be messengered to your house by end of business today. You're welcome to consult an attorney if you have questions." His reply came immediately. "You can't do this." I typed. "I already did." Then I blocked his number. The 10 a.m. board call was routine. Quarterly numbers. Strategic planning. The usual corporate ballet where everyone performs competence and no one admits uncertainty. I delivered my updates with the same calm authority I always did, and no one asked why I looked like I hadn't slept. Because at this level, personal problems stay personal. After the call, Jennifer brought me coffee and a sandwich I hadn't asked for, but apparently needed based on her disapproving look at my appearance. "Eat," she commanded. "Whatever's going on in your life, you still need calories." "Yes, ma'am." She lingered in the doorway, which was unlike her. Jennifer was efficient, direct, not prone to lingering. "Something else?" I asked. "Your father-in-law called 3 times. I told him you were unavailable." I looked up from the sandwich. "How did you know not to put him through?" "Because in 12 years he's called this office exactly once when his consulting position was set up. The fact that he's calling now multiple times told me something had changed. And the fact that you look like hell told me it wasn't a change you wanted to talk about." Smart woman. This is why she'd survived every restructuring, every tough quarter, every moment I needed someone to tell me hard truths. "Thanks, Jennifer. You want to tell me what happened?" I considered it. Jennifer had earned the right to know. She'd been more loyal than my own family in some ways, but telling her would make it real in a different way. It would bring my personal catastrophe into the professional space I'd kept so carefully separate. "Family drama," I said finally, the usual kind, only louder. She nodded, accepting the non-answer, and left me to my sandwich and my thoughts. The 2 o'clock investor presentation went well. I talked about growth projections and market positioning, about innovation pipelines and competitive advantages, and I felt solid again, confident again, like a man who knew his worth because the market had assigned it a number with a lot of zeros. But in the breaks between meetings, in the quiet moments when I wasn't performing competence, I kept thinking about Miranda's face in the kitchen, about the way she'd looked at me like I was a stranger, about her inability to tell me what love meant to her. Around 4 my phone rang, not Richard's block number, but Miranda's. I stared at it for 3 rings before I answered. Hello. Hi. Her voice was tight, controlled, the way it got when she was holding back emotion through sheer force of will. Are you coming home for dinner? I have a client dinner. I'll be late. 8 or 9, probably. Okay. My mother called. I imagine she did. She's upset, very upset. Says my father is devastated, that he's locked himself in his study, that he won't talk to anyone. I waited for the rest of it, the part where she would ask me to apologize, to fix it, to make it right. She wants me to convince you to reconsider, to give him his job back. And what do you want, Miranda? Another pause longer this time. I don't know. I want this not to be happening. I want to go back to yesterday when everything made sense. Even if the sense was based on things I didn't know. We can't go back. I know. But Marcus, he's my father. He's Cameron's grandfather. Are you really going to destroy him over one bad comment? This was the moment where she chose sides, where 18 years of marriage met a lifetime of being Richard Blackwood's daughter, and we would see which bond was stronger. It wasn't one comment, Miranda. It was 18 years of comments. 18 years of him treating me like I was lucky to be at his table, while I was paying for his table. 18 years of him teaching our son that success means having the biggest check and the loudest voice. That being a man means making other men feel small. He didn't know. That's not an excuse. His ignorance doesn't erase his cruelty. And even if I gave him his job back, even if I pretended last night didn't happen, it wouldn't change what he said to Cameron. It wouldn't change the fact that he tried to poison my son against me. I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line. I could picture her in our house, the influence of her parents, my money, our shared life that was suddenly showing all its fault lines. So what happens now? She asked quietly. I don't know. I guess we figure it out. But Miranda, I'm not going to apologize for defending myself. I don't regret finally telling the truth, and I'm not giving your father his job back, so everyone can go back to being comfortable at my expense, even if it costs us our marriage. The question hung there terrible and clarifying. Is that what you're saying? That staying married to me requires that I continue to diminish myself for your father's benefit? No, I don't know. Marcus, this is hard. Are you asking me to choose? I'm not asking you to choose anything. I'm just finally being honest about who I am and what I'm worth. If that's incompatible with being your husband, then maybe we need to face that. The silence on the other end stretched so long I thought she'd hung up. Then, finally, I need time. Take all the time you need. Will you be home tonight after your dinner? Yes. Good. We'll talk then. She hung up and I sat in my office with its glass walls and its view of the city I'd conquered while pretending to be conquered. And I wondered if victory always felt this much like a loss. Jennifer buzzed in with more coffee. Your 6 o'clock is here. Should I send them in? Give me 5 minutes. She nodded and closed the door. And I used those 5 minutes to pull myself together, to remember that I was good at this, that I had built something real and valuable, that my worth wasn't determined by whether Richard Blackwood approved of me or whether Miranda could figure out how to love the person I actually was instead of the person I pretended to be. 5 minutes. Then I stood, straightened my tie, and went back to being the man I'd always been in this building, confident, capable, worth every zero on my paycheck. It was easier here. It was always easier here. The restaurant was the kind of place Richard Blackwood would have loved. All dark wood and leather booths, dim lighting that suggested intimacy and exclusivity, prices that weren't listed on the menu, because if you had to ask, you shouldn't be there. I'd made the reservation 3 weeks ago, back when my biggest concern had been landing this client, back when I still thought I knew who I was in my own life. The clients were a husband and wife team from Denver, Sarah and Michael Chun, who'd built a logistics company that was growing faster than their infrastructure could support. They needed what Meridian Solutions did best, systems that scaled, technology that anticipated problems before they became catastrophes, consulting that was more partnership than prescription. I'd reviewed their file in the car on the way over, forcing myself to focus on revenue projections and operational challenges instead of the fact that my marriage might be ending. And my son was trying to reconcile the grandfather he'd loved with the man who tried to teach him that cruelty was strength. They were already seated when I arrived, and I could tell from Sarah's body language leaning forward, engaged, interested, that this was going to be a good meeting. Some things you just know, some patterns you recognize after years of reading rooms and people and the subtle mathematics of human interaction. Marcus Michael stood to shake my hand. Thanks for making time. We know you're busy. Never too busy for the right partnership. I slid into the booth across from them, accepted a menu I wouldn't really look at, and shifted into the version of myself that was easier, competent, focused, confident. We talked business over the appetizers. They explained their growth trajectory, their pain points, the places where their current systems were cracking under the strain. I listened, asked questions, offered initial thoughts that were specific enough to demonstrate expertise, but vague enough to leave room for negotiation. It was going well, going exactly how these things were supposed to go. Then Sarah said something that changed the tenor of the evening. You know what I appreciate about you, Marcus? You listen. You actually listen. Most of the CEOs we meet with are already selling before we've finished explaining the problem. They're so busy proving how smart they are that they don't actually hear what we need. That's because they're insecure, Michael added, cutting into his steak. Secure people don't need to dominate every conversation. The words hit differently than they were intended. They were talking about business, about CEO personalities, about the kind of posturing that happens in boardrooms across America every day. But all I heard was, secure people don't need to dominate every conversation. Richard Blackwood had needed to dominate every conversation. He'd needed to make sure everyone knew he was the smartest, the most successful, the most worthy of respect. And I'd let him. I'd given him that space because I'd thought I was secure enough not to need it. But maybe that wasn't security. Maybe that was just erasure. Marcus, Sarah was looking at me with concern. You okay? You drifted off a bit there. Sorry. Long day, you were saying. But Sarah was perceptive. It was probably why her company was succeeding, and she didn't just move on. Is everything all right? We can reschedule if this is a bad time. It's not. I stopped. I considered the usual deflections, the professional distance I kept between my personal life and my work. Then I thought about what I'd told Cameron last night about being honest, about not making myself small. Actually, I'm in the middle of some family stuff. Nothing that affects my ability to work with you, but it's been a distraction. Family stuff is never nothing, Sarah said gently. We get it. We've been there. Last year, Sarah's father had a stroke, Michael nodded. We almost lost a major contract because we were so focused on getting him into the right facility, managing his care. Sometimes life just happens in the middle of everything else. There was something in the way they said it, matter of fact, compassionate, without being nosy, that made me want to tell them more than I should. Maybe it was the exhaustion, maybe it was the wine, maybe it was just that I'd spent the last 18 years not talking about the things that mattered and the dam had finally broken. My father-in-law, I said slowly, has been treating me like I'm less than I am for our entire marriage. And last night, I finally told him the truth, that I've actually been supporting him financially for years while he was insulting me. And now everything's falling apart. The words hung there, vulnerable and inappropriate for a business dinner, and I waited for them to get uncomfortable, change the subject, suggest we focus on the logistics proposal. Instead, Sarah leaned back in the booth and smiled, not mockingly, but with something that looked like recognition. Good for you, she said. I blinked. What? Good for you for standing up for yourself, for telling the truth. That takes guts, especially in family situations. It's easier, Michael raised his wine glass slightly. It's easier to just keep the peace, let people think what they want to think, but it costs you every time you bite your tongue. My father, Sarah continued, thought Michael wasn't good enough for me when we first got married. Thought he was too ambitious, too much of a risk taker, that he'd never be stable enough. It took my dad years to finally see that Michael was exactly what I needed, someone who pushed me, who challenged me, who wouldn't let me just coast on my family's reputation. And even then, Michael added, it wasn't until I stopped trying to prove myself to him. Once I stopped caring what he thought, stopped trying to win his approval, everything changed. He started to respect me because I respected myself enough not to need his validation. I sat with that, turning it over in my mind like a stone you find on a beach, smooth, heavy, containing more than its size suggests. The problem is, I said, I think I waited too long. My wife has known me for 18 years, and she never really knew who I was because I didn't tell her. I let her family create this narrative where I was the junior partner, where they were doing us a favor by including me. And now that the truth is out, she doesn't know how to reconcile it. Maybe that's not your problem to solve, Sarah said quietly. Maybe she needs to do her own work. Figure out who she married and why she never asked the questions that would have given her the answer. The waiter appeared to clear the plates, offered dessert menus. Buy me a moment to process what Sarah had just said. When he left, I found myself wanting to keep talking, to continue this conversation with these near strangers who somehow understood what my own wife couldn't seem to grasp. You know the worst part, I said. I thought I was being noble. I thought letting my father-in-law feel superior was a gift I was giving him, a kindness. But my 16-year-old son saw it for what it really was, self-erasure. And he asked me why I did it, and I didn't have a good answer. Because there isn't one, Michael said. There's never a good reason to make yourself smaller for someone else's comfort. There are understandable reasons, sympathetic reasons, but not good ones. The question is, Sarah added, what are you going to do now? Are you going to stay honest, even when it's uncomfortable, or are you going to go back to playing the version of yourself that keeps everyone else happy? It was the question I'd been avoiding all day. The one Miranda had almost asked, but couldn't quite articulate. The one Cameron would eventually want answered. I don't know, I admitted. Being honest feels like standing on the edge of a cliff, like one wrong move, and everything falls. Everything's already falling, Sarah pointed out. The question is whether you're going to try to catch it and put it back exactly as it was, or whether you're going to let it land and see what shape it takes. We talked more over dessert about their company, about timelines and proposals, and the practical matters that had ostensibly brought us together. But the real conversations had already been said. When we finally stood to leave, Sarah shook my hand and held it a moment longer than necessary. Whatever you decide, Marcus, make sure it's a decision you can live with, not just tomorrow, but 10 years from now. Because that's the thing about big choices. You don't just make them once, you live them every day after. I got home around 9:30 to find the house dark, except for the light in the kitchen. Miranda was sitting at the table, the same table where everything had exploded last night with a cup of tea that had probably gone cold hours ago. How was dinner? She asked when I came in. Productive, we'll probably get the account. That's good. We were being so careful with each other, so polite, like diplomats negotiating a peace treaty in a language neither of us spoke fluently. Cameron in bed. I asked. Yeah, he had practice, then homework. Then he said he was tired. I think he's just avoiding. She gestured vaguely. All of this smart kid, he gets that from you. The compliment felt strange, like she was trying it on for size, seeing if it fit in this new version of our relationship where she knew I was actually smart, actually successful, actually someone worth admiring instead of tolerating. I poured myself some water and sat down across from her. And for a moment we just looked at each other, these two people who'd shared a life, but maybe not a truth. I've been thinking, Miranda said finally, about what you said this morning, about how I lied too by letting my father treat you the way he did. Miranda, no, let me finish. You were right. I lied. I told myself I was keeping the peace, but really I was just avoiding conflict. It was easier to let him think he was superior to you than to stand up to him, because standing up to him would have meant confronting him. And her voice broke slightly. I wasn't brave enough to do that. The admission sat between us, raw and honest. I'm not sure I was brave either, I said. I think I was just tired. Tired of being small, but tired of watching my son learn that being a man means taking insults gracefully. He's angry with me, Miranda said quietly. Cameron won't say it directly, but I can feel it. He's angry that I didn't defend you, that I let Grandpa say those things. He'll forgive you. He's 16. It's his job to be mad at us for something, but he's right to be angry. I failed you both. I prioritized my father's feelings over yours, over our son's understanding of what a healthy relationship looks like. She stared down at her cold tea. My mother called again 4 times. She wants me to convince you to change your mind about the job, about everything. She wants things to go back to normal. There's no normal to go back to. That normal was built on a lie. The lie that your father was the successful one, and I was lucky to be included in his world. Miranda nodded slowly. I know, and I don't want to go back either. Not really, it's terrifying, Marcus. This new truth, this version of our life where I have to face the fact that I married someone extraordinary and then spent 18 years treating him like he was ordinary. I'm ordinary. I just happen to be good at my job. No. She looked at me, and her eyes were fierce. No, you don't get to do that. You don't get to finally tell the truth about your success and then immediately minimize it. You build a company from nothing. You employ 300 people. You've been supporting my parents for almost a decade while they insulted you. That's not ordinary. The word should have felt good. They should have been the validation I'd been missing for years. but instead they just felt sad, like a eulogy that arrives too late to matter. I appreciate that, I said carefully. But Miranda, the question isn't whether I'm extraordinary or ordinary. The question is whether you can be married to the person I actually am, or if you need me to be the person you thought I was. That's not fair. It's completely fair. You said this morning you didn't know who you were married to, so now you know. Now you know I'm the CEO, the one with the power and the money and the success your father kept saying I didn't have. Can you live with that? Can you be married to someone who's actually more successful than your father? Who's been quietly supporting your family while letting them think they were supporting us? She was crying now silently, tears running down her face without her bothering to wipe them away. I don't know, she whispered. I don't know if I can, not because I don't want to, but because I don't know how. I don't know how to be married to someone I've been underestimating for 18 years. The honesty of it broke something in my chest. Then maybe I said softly, we need to figure that out. Maybe we need some space to understand what we actually have versus what we thought we had. Are you asking for a divorce? The question hung there, terrible and clarifying. I'm asking for the truth. I'm asking for a marriage that's based on seeing each other clearly instead of playing roles we think we're supposed to play. But if you can't give me that, if you need me to go back to being small so you can be comfortable, then yes, maybe we need to talk about what comes next. Miranda stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor with a sound that felt violent in the quiet kitchen. I need to think. I can't do this right now. That's okay. I'm going to sleep in the guest room just for tonight, just until I can think clearly. Whatever you need. She moved to the door, then stopped with her back to me. Marcus, do you still love me? The question was so small, so vulnerable. So completely unlike the woman who'd sat across from me at breakfast talking about lies and betrayal. Yes, I said, because it was true, even if I wasn't sure what that truth meant. Anymore, I still love you. I've always loved you. That was never the question. Then what is the question? I thought about Sarah Chen's words at dinner about making decisions you could live with 10 years from now, about letting things fall and seeing what shape they take. The question, I said slowly, is whether love is enough. Whether loving someone means sacrificing yourself for their comfort, or whether real love requires both people to show up fully, honestly, unapologetically. She didn't answer. She just left, and I heard her footsteps on the stairs. I heard the guest room door click shut with a soft click that sounded like punctuation on a sentence I couldn't quite parse. I sat alone in the kitchen with the remains of her cold tea in my empty water glass, and I thought about all the versions of myself I'd played over the years for Richard, for Miranda, for a peace that had never really been peace. Only the absence of honest conflict. My phone buzzed. A text from Jennifer. Client confirmed. They're sending the contract tomorrow. Well done. I should have felt triumphant. I should have felt successful. I'd just landed a major account. I'd just proven once again that I was good at this, that my professional life was solid even when my personal life was fracturing. But all I felt was tired. Tired of winning at work and losing at home. Tired of being one person in one building and another person in another. Tired of the endless performance of self, the constant calculation of who needed which version of me and when. I turned off the kitchen light and went upstairs past the closed guest room door without stopping and lay down on the bed I'd shared with Miranda for 18 years and felt the emptiness beside me like a presence, like a ghost of something that had been there so long I'd forgotten it was there until it wasn't. Outside, the rain started again. Of course it did, because apparently the universe had decided everything in my life needed to be either falling or drowning, and there was no third option. I closed my eyes and tried to sleep and dreamed I was standing on the edge of a cliff, looking down at the ocean below, knowing I was going to have to jump, but not quite ready to let go. Not yet, but soon. The morning came with weak sunlight, filtering through clouds that looked bruised and undecided. I woke up in an empty bed to the distant sound of the shower running in the guest bathroom. Miranda's shower in the space that had become hers overnight, drawing territorial lines in a house that suddenly felt too small to contain both of us in our respective truths. I went through my morning routine on autopilot. Shower, shave, get dressed in the armor of success that felt both more and less comfortable than it had 3 days ago. Everything was the same, everything was different. The paradox of revelation is that it changes nothing about the facts while changing everything about their meaning. Cameron was already downstairs when I came down, eating cereal with the focused intensity of someone determined to pretend everything was normal. He looked up when I entered, and I saw him do that quick assessment teenagers do, checking the emotional weather, deciding how much energy it would take to engage. Morning. Morning, I said, pouring coffee. Morning. He went back to his cereal, but I could feel the questions radiating off him like heat. I sat down across from him. You can ask what you want to know. He looked up surprised by the directness, then put his spoon down with a small clink against the bowl. Is Mom okay? No. Are you guys okay, or are you getting a divorce? Is Mom okay? Because Cameron at 16 already understood that I was probably okay, that I'd been holding things together for years. But his mother was the unknown variable. I don't know. I said honestly. She's processing a lot, learning things she should have known all along. That's hard. But she could have asked. She could have paid attention. The accusation in his voice was sharp, and I recognized something in it. The particular disappointment that comes when you realize your parents are flawed humans who make questionable choices instead of the infallible authorities you'd been led to believe they were. She could have. I agreed. But I could have told her. I could have set boundaries with your grandfather years ago. We all made choices that led here. Cam, this isn't all on your mom. You're being too nice about it. Maybe I'm just trying not to create a situation where you have to choose sides between your parents. He absorbed this, stirring his uneaten cereal. What's going to happen with you and Mom? I don't know. We're figuring it out. That's what adults say when they're about to get divorced. The observation was so astute, so painfully accurate that I almost laughed. We're not there yet, but yes, things are uncertain right now. Your mom needs to decide if she can be married to who I really am instead of who she thought I was. And I need to decide if I can be in a relationship where I'm constantly making myself smaller to keep other people comfortable. Cameron pushed his bowl away. I don't want you guys to get divorced. Cameron pushed his bowl away. I don't want you guys to get divorced. I know, buddy, but I also don't want to go back to the way things were with Grandpa treating you like crap and you just taking it. That was worse. I think seeing that was worse than this uncertainty. The words landed like heavy, true stones. When did you get so wise? I've always been wise. You just didn't notice because you were too busy being invisible. He said it without malice, just stating a fact. But it cut deeper than any of Richard's insults, because it came from love, from wanting better for me, from seeing what I'd been doing to myself, even when I couldn't see it. You're right, I said. I was being invisible. I thought I was being selfless, but really I was just afraid. Of what? I considered the question. I really considered it searching for the truth beneath all the justifications I'd built over the years. Of being seen, I think, of being known and then rejected. It's safer to be underestimated because then failure doesn't matter as much. If no one expects anything from you, you can never really let them down. Cameron looked at me with eyes that were too old for 16, that had seen too much in the last 48 hours. But you can let yourself down and you can teach your kid that it's normal to hide who you are to make other people happy. Yes, I said quietly, you can do both of those things and I'm sorry I did. He stood, grabbed his backpack, paused in the doorway. Dad, don't go back to being invisible, even if it means things stay a mess for a while. Promise me. I promise. He nodded and left. And I heard his car start. I heard him drive away to school where his problems were probably simpler, tests and soccer games, and figuring out how to talk to the girl he liked. Normal teenage problems instead of watching his family implode over truths that should have been told years ago. Miranda appeared a few minutes later dressed for the gallery in a way that looked like armor. Sharp lines, dark colors, hair pulled back so tight it had to hurt. She poured coffee without looking at me. I'm going in early, she said to the coffee maker. Okay, we should talk tonight. Really talk. I agree. She turned to look at me then, and I could see the exhaustion in her face. The evidence of a sleepless night spent wrestling with revelations that rewrote 18 years of shared history. I talked to my mother last night after you went to bed. I waited because there was more to come, and I could tell from her tone it wasn't going to be comfortable. She wants us to go to dinner this Sunday. The whole family. She thinks we need to clear the air and move on. No. The word came out harder than I'd intended, but I didn't soften it. Marcus. No, Miranda, I'm not going to sit at your parents' table and pretend everything is okay. I'm not going to let your father deliver some non-apology about misunderstandings while your mother serves salmon and we all perform family harmony. That's the exact pattern I'm done with. He's my father. He made a mistake. He made 18 years of mistakes. Calculated, deliberate mistakes designed to make me feel small. And he's only sorry now because he got caught, because he found out I've been supporting him while he was insulting me. Miranda put her coffee cup down with enough force I thought it might shatter. So what's your plan? Just never speak to my parents again? Just keep punishing them forever? I'm not punishing anyone. I'm just done pretending. If your father wants to apologize, really apologize, not just smooth things over so he can go back to feeling superior, then he knows where to find me. But I'm not volunteering for another family bonding performance where I'm the designated punching bag. You're being unreasonable. Am I, or am I finally being reasonable after years of being unreasonably accommodating? She grabbed her purse, her keys, her phone, gathering the pieces of herself like a soldier getting ready for battle. I can't do this now. I have a meeting at 9. Then don't do it now. Do it tonight when you're ready to really hear what I'm saying. Instead of just defending your father. She stopped at the door with her back to me, and I could see the tension in her shoulders. The way she was holding herself together by sheer force of will. Do you even want to be married to me anymore? She asked so quietly I almost didn't hear her. I want to be married to someone who sees me, who values me, who doesn't need me to be small so she can stay comfortable. If that's you, then yes, I want to be married to you. If it's not, then we have a problem. She left without answering, and the house settled into the particular silence that follows conflict, heavy, waiting, uncertain. At the office, I buried myself in work. There were contracts to review, strategy sessions to lead, problems to solve, that had clear solutions and measurable outcomes. It was easier here, where success was quantifiable, where my worth was documented in revenue metrics and growth and stock prices that didn't lie. Jennifer brought me lunch I didn't remember ordering. You're doing the thing, she said, setting down a sandwich and a salad. What thing? The thing where you work yourself to exhaustion to avoid thinking about whatever is happening in your personal life. You did it when you were starting the company. You did it during the market crash in 08, and you're doing it now. It's called being dedicated. It's called avoidance. Eat the sandwich, Marcus, and maybe consider talking to someone about whatever is going on because you look like hell and you're starting to scare the junior staff. I'm scaring the junior staff. You're not usually this intense. Normally you're intense, but approachable. Now you're just intense. I took a bite of the sandwich to satisfy her, and she sat down opposite my desk uninvited, which meant this was serious, which meant she was about to deploy the particular brand of brutal honesty that had made her invaluable over the years. How bad is it? She asked the family situation. Unless you have some other personal crisis I don't know about. I put the sandwich down and leaned back in my chair, looking at this woman who'd been with me from almost the beginning, who'd watched me build something from nothing while apparently hiding who I was from my own family. Did you know, I asked, that my wife didn't know what I really did, that her family thought I was just some project manager somewhere? Jennifer's face did something complicated. Surprise, then comprehension, then something that looked almost like pity. I suspected, she said carefully. You never talked about your family, never brought them to company events, never mentioned your father-in-law, except that one time years ago when you set up that consulting gig for him. I just figured there was some family dynamic I didn't understand. Some reason you kept these worlds separate. The reason was cowardice. I let them think I was less than I am because the correction seemed harder than the accommodation. Or, Jennifer said softly, you were protecting yourself. Sometimes we hide parts of ourselves from the people we love because we're afraid they'll love the wrong version, the successful version, the powerful version, instead of the real person underneath. I sat with that, turning it over like one of those optical illusions where you can see two different images depending on how you look at it. Maybe I admitted, but the cost was too high. I taught my son that being a man means accepting disrespect. I let my wife's father systematically diminish me for years. And for what? To protect some version of myself that wasn't even real. So what are you going to do now? I don't know. My wife needs time to process. My son's mad at everyone. My father-in-law is devastated according to my mother-in-law, who wants us all to have dinner and pretend everything is okay. Are you going to dinner? No, that would be a regression. Good. And you're not a regression person. You're a move-forward person. Even when moving forward is terrifying. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. It's Diane. Please reconsider about Sunday. Richard is sorry. We're family. I showed it to Jennifer. My mother-in-law. They got my personal cell somehow. What are you going to say? I thought about it. about family loyalty and forgiveness and the difference between reconciliation and capitulation. Richard is sorry. We're family. I showed it to Jennifer, my mother-in-law. They got my personal cell somehow. What are you going to say? I thought about it, about family loyalty and forgiveness and the difference between reconciliation and capitulation. I texted back, Diane, I appreciate that you want to fix this, but Richard needs to apologize to me directly, not through intermediaries. And the apology needs to be real, acknowledging years of disrespect, not just regret for getting caught. Until then, family dinners are off the table. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. Jennifer smiled. Look at you setting boundaries. I'm proud. It feels terrible. That's because you're not used to it. Boundaries feel like cruelty when you've spent your whole life being boundaryless, but they're not. They're just honesty with consequences. Another text came through, this time from Miranda. My mother is upset. She says you're being cruel. I showed it to Jennifer again. My wife, apparently I'm cruel. Now are you going to reply? I thought about what Sarah Chun had said at dinner about making decisions you could live with 10 years from now, about letting things fall and seeing what shape they take. I texted Miranda back. I'm being honest. If that feels cruel, maybe ask yourself why honesty feels like cruelty in your family. Jennifer winced. That's going to land hard. Good. I'm done with soft landings. The afternoon passed slowly with meetings and calls and the endless machinery of running a company. Around 4, my assistant buzzed me on the intercom. Marcus, there's someone here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment, but he says it's important. Who is it? A pause. He says he's your father-in-law. The words hung in the air like a dare. Tell him I'm busy. He says he'll wait. He's willing to wait as long as it takes. I could have had security escort him out. I could have left through the garage and avoided him altogether. But a part of me, the part that was done hiding, done accommodating, done being smaller than I was, wanted this confrontation. Give me 5 minutes, then send him in. I used those 5 minutes to center myself, to remember that I was on my turf now, my building, my kingdom. Richard Blackwood had no power here, except what I gave him. When he walked through my office door, I almost didn't recognize him. The man who'd sat at my dining table 3 nights ago, radiating confidence and superiority, was gone. In his place was someone smaller, older, uncertain, a man who'd lost his script and didn't know how to improvise. Marcus, he said, standing awkwardly in front of my desk like a supplicant before a throne. Richard, Jennifer said you'd wait as long as it takes. I hope you brought a book. I'm in meetings until 7. He flinched at the coldness of my tone, and I felt a small, uncharitable surge of satisfaction. I came to apologize. So apologize. He glanced at the chairs in front of my desk. May I sit? No, you can stand. I've stood for 18 years of your insults. You can stand for 5 minutes of apology. His face went red, then pale, and I could see him wrestling with pride and need, trying to decide if he could afford to walk out or if he needed this more than his dignity could bear. Need one. I was wrong, he said, the words coming out stiff and rehearsed as if he'd practiced them in the car. What I said at dinner about Cameron being more of a man than you. I was out of line. Yes, you were. What else? What do you mean, what else? That wasn't 18 years of insults, Richard. That was one comment. What else are you apologizing for? He looked genuinely confused, and I realized with a jolt that he didn't even know. He didn't know how many small cuts he'd delivered, how many subtle diminishments, how systematically he'd worked to make me feel inferior. Tell me something, Richard. Do you even remember the consulting position, the one I paid you $180,000 a year plus bonuses for? Of course I remember. Do you remember a single meeting you attended, a single piece of advice you gave that actually impacted company decisions? Or were you just cashing checks and telling yourself you'd earned them? His silence was answer enough. You took my money, I said quietly while telling my son I wasn't enough of a man. You accepted my charity while making sure everyone in your family knew you thought I was weak, inadequate, less than you. And now you're here because your wife sent you. Because you need something from me. Not because you genuinely understand what you did wrong. That's not fair. It's completely fair. You don't actually think you did anything wrong, except get caught. You think the problem is that I told the truth? Not that you spent 18 years being cruel. Richard's hands were shaking now, and I could see sweat on his brow despite the air conditioning. Marcus, please, I'm trying to apologize. I'm trying to fix this. Then tell me what you're sorry for specifically. Not the general, I was wrong speech your wife helped you write in the car. Tell me what you're actually sorry for. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again, and nothing came out, except the sound that might have been the start of words that never quite formed. That's what I thought. I said, "You're not sorry, Richard. You're just scared. Scared of what this means for your relationship with Miranda and Cameron. Scared of what people will think when they find out you've been on my payroll. Scared that your carefully constructed image of being the powerful patriarch is crumbling." "I am sorry," he insisted, but his voice broke. I don't know how to be honest. How to admit you've been wrong for years. How to see me as a real person instead of a reflection of your own inadequacy." The words were harsh, harsher than I'd planned, but they were also true. And I was so tired of softening the truth to protect other people's feelings. Richard just stood there diminished and lost, and for a moment I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Then I remembered Cameron's face. I remembered my son asking if his grandfather was right about him being more of a man than me, and the sympathy evaporated. "I think we're done here," I said. "You can tell Diane you tried. You can tell Miranda you apologized, but we both know this wasn't real, and we both know nothing has really changed." "What do you want from me?" he asked. And for the first time he sounded genuinely desperate. "I want you to actually understand what you did. I want you to sit with the fact that you spent almost 2 decades treating me like I was lucky to be at your table while I was paying for the table. I want you to realize that the man you tried to teach your grandson to look down on is the man who's been holding your family up. And if I do that, if I really understand, then what? Then maybe we can have a real conversation, but not today, not until you've done the work of actually examining your own behavior, instead of just trying to smooth things over so life can go back to being comfortable." Richard nodded slowly, then turned for the door. At the threshold he stopped. "I thought you were weak," he said without looking at me. "For years I thought you were weak because you didn't fight back. You didn't stand up for yourself. You just took whatever I said and smiled. And I'm realizing now that maybe that wasn't weakness. Maybe that was you being strong enough to let me feel big." He left before I could answer, and I sat in my office with the late afternoon sun slanting through the windows, and I thought about strength and weakness and all the ways we misdefine them. My phone buzzed. "Cameron, coach canceled practice. Can I come to your office? I want to see where you actually work." I smiled. The first genuine smile in days. "Yes. Come now. I'll give you the full tour. Because if nothing else good came out of this mess, at least my son would finally see me clearly. And maybe that was enough for now." Cameron arrived 45 minutes later, appearing in my office doorway with his backpack still slung over one shoulder and an expression that was trying for casual, but didn't quite hide its curiosity. I could see him taking in the space, the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, the modern furniture that cost more than his car, the framed photos on the credenza that documented company milestones he'd never heard of. "Holy crap," he said, then immediately looked embarrassed. "Sorry, Dad, this is your office." "Language," I said automatically, then smiled. "But yes, this is my office." He came in slowly, touching things carefully, as if they might be fragile or forbidden. The edge of my desk, the leather chair, a crystal award from some tech journal naming US one of the fastest growing companies in the region. "This is insane. I knew you said you were the CEO, but I couldn't picture what that actually meant. It means a lot of meetings and a good view." "Dad, stop minimizing. You're doing that thing again where you make yourself smaller." He was right. Even now, even after everything, my first instinct was to deflect, to downplay, to make sure he didn't think I was showing off. "You're right. I'm sorry. Yes, this is my office. I've earned it. The company's done well, and this is one of the perks." Cameron sat in one of the chairs across from my desk and looked at me as if he were seeing me for the first time, or maybe as if he were finally seeing me clearly for the first time since he'd been old enough to have opinions about who people were. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Anything. When you started the company, I would have been, 3 years old? 4, 3. You were 3 when I quit my job at Techmark and decided to do this crazy thing your mother thought was too risky. She didn't want you to do it." I considered how to answer that honestly, without making Miranda the villain in her story. She was scared. We had a young child, a mortgage, all the usual responsibilities. Starting a company meant giving up a steady salary, health insurance, a retirement match, all the things that feel like security. I understood her fear, but I couldn't shake the feeling that if I didn't try, I'd spend the rest of my life wondering what could have been. "But you did it anyway." "I did it anyway." And she supported me once I convinced her I wasn't being reckless. She went back to work at the gallery to cover expenses while I was getting things off the ground. The first 2 years were brutal. Long hours, constant uncertainty, months where I wasn't sure if we'd be able to make payroll. But you figured it out. We figured it out. Me and the team I built. Your mother who held down the fort at home. It wasn't just me, Cam. Building something like this is never just one person. He absorbed this processing, and I could see him rewriting his understanding of his own history. The years when I'd been absent more than I was present, when I'd missed bedtimes and soccer games, when he'd been too young to understand I wasn't avoiding him, but building something that would eventually give him opportunities I'd never had. Mom knows. He asked about those years, about how hard it was. She lived through them, but knowing something intellectually and really understanding it emotionally are different things. I think she knew I was working hard, but she didn't fully grasp what I was building because I didn't talk about it much. I kept work and home separate. Why? It was the same question everyone kept asking. Jennifer, Miranda, now Cameron. Why had I kept these worlds apart? Why had I hidden this version of myself? Because, I said slowly, working it out even as I spoke, your grandfather made me feel like my success was threatening to him. And your mother, she loved her father, looked up to him, needed him to be the powerful one, so I let him be. I thought I was being generous, giving him the space to maintain his self-image, but really I was just avoiding confrontation. That's messed up. Yes, it was. Cameron stood and walked to the windows, looking down at the city below. People moving like blood through arteries. Everyone busy with their own dramas and ambitions and carefully constructed self-images. Can you show me? He asked, turning to face me. The rest of it, the company. I want to see what you really built. We started on the 3rd floor. Development and engineering. Rows of programmers hunched over multiple monitors. The air buzzing with the particular energy of people solving complex problems. Cameron's eyes were wide as we walked through. All these people work for you with me. I sign the checks, but they're the ones who make the real magic happen. A young woman looked up from her code. Sarah Mishi, one of our senior developers. Brilliant and abrasive in equal measure. Marcus, thank God. Can you settle a dispute about the new API structure? Sarah, this is my son Cameron. Cam. Sarah is the reason our platform doesn't crash every time a client has a traffic spike. She grinned and shook Cameron's hand. Your dad's being modest. He's the one who designed the original architecture. We're just improving on his framework. You coded this? Cameron looked at me with something between surprise and respect. A long time ago now. Mostly I sit in meetings and let brilliant people like Sarah do the real work. He also, Sarah broke in, makes the final call on technical decisions when we're deadlocked. Remembers details from client meetings that save our asses and once debugged a critical production issue at 2 a.m. because he's the only one who understood a particular edge case in the system. She said it matter-of-factly. Then she dove back into her code, and we moved on. But I could feel Cameron's eyes on me reevaluating, recalculating. On the 4th floor, sales and client services, we ran into Michael Torres, my head of sales, who immediately launched into an enthusiastic spiel about the Chin account I'd closed 2 days ago. Marcus, man, I don't know what you said to them, but they signed for 3 years at full rate. No negotiation. That's unheard of with enterprise clients. I listened to their problems and explained how we could solve them. Novel concept, I know. Michael laughed. Yeah, but most people listen and then pitch what we want to sell. You actually heard what they needed and structured a solution around. That's why clients love you. He noticed Cameron. Who's this? My son Cameron Cam. This is Michael, who makes sure we actually have revenue to pay all these people. They shook hands, and Michael immediately switched into mentor mode, something he did with any young person who seemed interested in business. Your dad's a legend around here. You know? When he started this company, he had 2 employees and a dream. Now we're closing 8-figure deals. That doesn't happen without vision, dedication, and the ability to make people believe in something before it exists. We moved through the 5th floor, marketing and operations, where people were designing campaigns and managing logistics, where someone was in a heated debate about brand positioning and someone else was on the phone with a vendor in what sounded like Mandarin. At every stop, people greeted me with genuine warmth. Not the deference you sometimes see with CEOs, people being careful, performing respect out of fear, but real warmth, jokes and questions, and an easy familiarity that spoke to a culture I tried hard to build where hierarchy mattered less than contribution. Cameron was quiet through most of it, just taking it all in, and I could see him processing the disconnect between the father he'd known, the one who sat quietly at family dinners while Grandpa held court, and this person who moved through a building full of people with easy confidence and authority. We ended up in the executive boardroom on the 6th floor with its massive table and walls covered in whiteboards filled with strategy notes and financial projections. This is where the board meets, I explained. Quarterly reviews, major decisions, the stuff that determines whether the company thrives or just survives. Cameron walked around the table slowly reading the whiteboards and stopped at one that had a growth chart showing our trajectory from startup to now. A hockey stick curve that represented years of work and risk and occasional terror. You built this, he said quietly. It wasn't a question. Yes. And Grandpa had no idea? No. How? How did he not know? How did Mom not know this isn't? You can't hide this. This is too big to hide. I didn't exactly hide it. Your mom knew I had a company. She knew it was doing well, but she never asked for details, and I never offered them. It was just easier that way. Safer. Safer. For who? For everyone. I thought. For your mom. Because she didn't have to choose between supporting me and supporting her father's need to feel superior. For me, because I didn't have to defend my success against his insecurity. For your grandfather, because he got to keep his self-image as the powerful patriarch. Cameron turned to face me, and his expression was complicated. Anger and admiration and disappointment, all mixed together. But what about me, Dad? What about what I learned from watching that? That you should hide who you are, that success is something to be ashamed of, that letting people treat you like crap is what love looks like. The words hit hard because they were true. Because my 16-year-old son had articulated what I'd spent years avoiding, that my accommodation hadn't just affected me, it had affected him. It had taught him lessons I never meant to teach. You're right, I said. I didn't think about what I was modeling for you. I thought I was being noble, but really I was just being a coward. I don't think you're a coward. I think he struggled for the words. I think you're someone who cares so much about other people's feelings that you forget yours matter too. We stood there in the boardroom, father and son, and I realized that somewhere in the last 3 days, Cameron had stopped being a child I needed to protect and had started being a person I could be honest with. I'm sorry, I said, for not showing you this sooner, for letting you grow up thinking your father was less than he is. I don't want an apology, Dad. I want you to promise me something. Anything. Promise me you won't go back to being invisible, even if it makes things harder with Mom. Even if Grandpa never apologizes the right way, even if everything falls apart, promise me you'll stay visible. The request was so serious, so important to him that I felt something crack open in my chest. I promise. We left the office around 7 and had dinner at a little Italian place Cameron liked. Casual, loud, the kind of place where you could talk without anyone paying attention to your conversation. Over pizza, Cameron asked me about the early years of the company, about the failures and near misses I'd never talked about the time we almost went bankrupt in year 3, about the night I came home and told Miranda I thought I'd made a terrible mistake leaving my steady job. What did she say? Cameron asked, genuinely curious. She told me to stop being dramatic and make it work. She wasn't always. I paused, trying to be fair. She wasn't always uncertain about us. There were years where she was my biggest supporter and where she believed in me more than I believed in myself. What changed? I think success changed things. When we were struggling, when it was us against the world, we were a team. But once the company took off, once there was real money and stability, your grandfather's voice got louder. He'd always had opinions about what I should be doing, how I should be running my life. But when we were broke, those opinions didn't matter as much. When we had money, when your mom wasn't worried about paying the rent anymore, she had the space to listen to him. And he had a lot to say about how I was doing everything wrong. Even though you weren't doing everything wrong, even though I wasn't. But Richard Blackwood has never been someone to let facts interfere with his opinions. Cameron laughed, then looked guilty. Is it okay that I think that's funny? Like, is that disloyal to Mom or whatever? It's okay to see people clearly, Cam. Even people you love, especially people you love. Actually, we ate in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Cameron said, Dad, can I tell you something? Of course, I'm kind of relieved about all this. I know that's weird because Mom's upset and you guys might get divorced and everything's a mess. But he paused, searching for words. But at least it's honest now. At least I know who you really are. And I like this version better, the real one. The words shouldn't have made me want to cry, but they did. Thank you. I managed to say that means more than you know. Are you going to tell other people like your friends, mom's friends, people who've known us for years? I considered it. I'd been so focused on the immediate crisis, Miranda, processing Richard's non-apology, keeping my company running, that I hadn't thought about the wider implications. We had a whole social circle, people we'd known for years. Couples who probably had their own assumptions about our marriage, our family dynamic, our respective successes. I don't know. It feels weird to make an announcement. Hey everyone. Surprise, I'm actually successful, but I don't want to keep hiding it either. Maybe you don't announce it. Maybe you just stop hiding it. Like if it comes up, you tell the truth instead of deflecting. When did you get so wise about human nature? I pay attention, and I've been watching you hide in plain sight for 16 years. I know all your deflection techniques. My phone buzzed. A text from Miranda. Where are you? We need to talk. I showed it to Cameron. Your mother. Apparently, it's time for the big conversation. Do you want me to come home with you for moral support? The offer was so sweet, so earnest that I almost took him up on it. But this was something Miranda and I needed to do alone. No, but thank you. This is between your mother and me. You shouldn't have to be in the middle of it. I'm already in the middle of it, but okay. He finished his pizza. Dad, whatever happens with you and Mom, I want you to know I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself, for telling the truth, for being who you really are. I dropped Cameron off at a friend's house. He'd arranged to stay there for the night, giving Miranda and my space to have whatever conversation we needed to have. And I drove home through streets that felt different than they had a week ago. Everything was the same. Nothing was the same. Miranda's car was in the driveway, lights on throughout the house, as if she were trying to keep the dark at bay. I sat in my car for a moment, gathering myself, thinking through all the possible versions of this conversation and trying to brace myself for the ones that would hurt the most. Then I went inside. She was waiting in the living room, sitting on the couch with her hands folded in her lap, like a woman preparing to deliver news she didn't want to give. Hi, I said. Hi. She looked up at me, and I could see she'd been crying. Cameron texted me. He said you showed him the office. He asked to see it. I gave him a tour. What did he think? He was impressed, proud, I think, maybe a little angry he didn't know sooner. Miranda nodded slowly. My father came to see you today at your office. He did. He said you were cruel, that you humiliated him. I sat down across from her, keeping the physical distance because it felt necessary. It felt honest. I was honest with him. If that felt like cruelty, maybe that says more about him than it does about me. He's trying. Marcus, he came all the way to your office to apologize. He came to perform an apology his wife made him deliver. There's a difference. Miranda's face hardened. You're not even willing to try, are you? You're just going to hold this grudge forever. Just punish him for being imperfect. Is that what you think? This is a grudge? Miranda, he spent 18 years systematically diminishing me while I paid his bills. This isn't about one bad comment or one imperfect moment. This is about a pattern of behavior that you enabled, that you participated in, that you're still defending even now. I'm not defending him. I'm trying to hold my family together. At my expense. Always at my expense. She stood abruptly, pacing now, the energy in the room shifting from sad to volatile. What do you want me to say, Marcus? That you're right? That my father's been terrible to you? Fine, you're right. He has, but he's also my father. He's Cameron's grandfather. He's family, and family means forgiveness. It means grace. It means not throwing people away when they make mistakes. I'm not throwing him away. I'm just done making myself smaller so he can feel bigger. But what about us? Her voice broke. What about our marriage? Are you throwing that away too? The question hung there heavy with all the things we'd been avoiding, all the truths we'd been dancing around since this started. I don't want to throw away our marriage, I said carefully. But I can't stay in a marriage where I have to be less than I am to keep you comfortable, where your father's feelings matter more than my dignity, where our son learns that love means self-erasure. That's not fair. It's completely fair. Miranda, you still haven't apologized. Not really, you've explained. You've justified. You've asked me to forgive your father, but you haven't actually owned your own part in this, in letting him treat me the way he did, in never asking about my work, in never standing up for me. She sat back down, and I watched her face cycle through emotions: anger, denial, recognition, grief. You're right, she said. Finally, So quietly I almost didn't hear her. I haven't apologized because if I apologize, if I really admit what I did, then I have to face what that makes me. What person? The person who married someone extraordinary and then spent 18 years treating him like he was ordinary. The person who let her father belittle her husband because it was easier than confrontation. The person who her voice broke completely now, who didn't love you the way you deserve to be loved. The admission sat between us like something breakable, and I felt my anger soften into something more complicated. Sadness, maybe, or a recognition that we'd both failed in different ways. Miranda, I need time, she cut in. Time to figure out if I can be the person you need me to be. If I can be married to who you really are, instead of who I convinced myself you were. And I don't know if I can. The words should have devastated me, but instead, I just felt tired. Okay, I said. Take the time you need. I'm going to stay with my parents for a while, just until I figure things out. With your parents. The people who created this problem, they're still my parents. Marcus, they're still my family. And what am I? She looked at me with eyes full of tears and something that might have been love, or might have been grief, or might have been both. I don't know anymore, she whispered. And that's the problem. She went to pack a bag, and I sat in our living room in the house I'd paid for in the life I'd built. And I wondered if honesty always cost this much, or if the cost was just finally coming due. The sound of Miranda's car pulling out of the driveway at 11:30 that night was the loneliest sound I'd ever heard. I stood at the window, watching her taillights disappear down the street, heading for her parents' house, for the people who'd created the problem she was now trying to solve by running away from its consequences. The house settled into a silence that felt alive, sentient, mocking. Every room echoed with absence. The kitchen where we'd had 1,000 breakfasts, the living room where we'd watched Cameron grow from baby to toddler to teenager. The bedroom we'd shared for 18 years, now just mine. The bed suddenly too big, too empty, too honest about what we'd become. I didn't sleep. I sat in my office, the room where this had all started, where I'd pulled out that folder that had rewritten everything, and I tried to understand how telling the truth could feel simultaneously like the most right and most wrong thing I'd ever done. Around 2 a.m., my phone buzzed. Cameron, Mom texted. Said she's at Grandma and Grandpa's. You okay? I stared at the message, my son checking on me from a friend's house at 2 in the morning because his family was imploding and he was worried about his father. I'm okay. I'm sorry you're in the middle of this. It's not your fault. No, really this was always going to happen, right? You can't build a house on lies forever. The wisdom in my 16-year-old son's words was both comforting and devastating. Get some sleep, Cam. School tomorrow. Yeah, love you, Dad. Love you too. I put the phone down and stared into nothing, thinking about houses built on lies, about foundations that seem solid until you actually test them, about the moment everything you thought was permanent reveals itself to be temporary. The morning came with cruel normalcy. The sun rising as if it didn't know my life had just been rearranged into shapes I didn't recognize. I showered, dressed, made coffee in a kitchen that felt too quiet, and tried to figure out what you do when your wife leaves and your marriage is in freefall, and you still have a company to run. You go to work apparently, because what else is there? Jennifer gave me one look as I walked in. Immediately ushered me into my office and closed the door. Okay, what happened? And don't tell me nothing, because you look like you haven't slept in a week. Miranda left. She's staying with her parents while she figures things out. Jennifer sat down heavily in the chair opposite my desk. Oh, Marcus. Yeah, I'm sorry. That's tough. It's honest. Maybe the first honest thing that's happened between us in years. Honesty isn't always healing. Not sometimes, it's just destructive. Sometimes you tell the truth, and everything burns down, and you're left standing in the ashes wondering if the fire was worth it. Jennifer was quiet for a moment, then leaned forward with her elbows on her knees. Her serious posture, the one she used when she was about to tell me something I needed to hear, whether I wanted to or not. Can I be honest with you as your friend, not your assistant? When are you not honest? Fair point. Here's the thing. You did the right thing. Standing up for yourself, telling the truth, refusing to keep making yourself small. All of that was right. And if your marriage can't survive you being fully yourself, then maybe it's not a marriage worth saving. The words landed like heavy, true, painful stones. We have a son together. 18 years of history. You can't just throw that away. I'm not suggesting you throw it away. I'm suggesting you recognize that maybe what you had wasn't actually working. It was just comfortable. And comfortable isn't the same as good. So what? I should just let my marriage end? Just give up? I'm saying you should stop setting yourself on fire to keep other people warm. Miranda left because she can't handle the truth about who you are. That's her work to do, Marcus, not yours. You've spent 18 years doing her emotional work for her. Maybe it's time to let her do her own. I wanted to argue, to defend Miranda, to explain all the ways she wasn't the villain in this story, but I was just so tired of defending people who wouldn't defend me. What if she doesn't come back? I asked quietly. Then you'll survive. You'll grieve. You'll have to figure out co-parenting and divorce lawyers and all the practical hell of unwinding a life you spent 18 years building. But you'll survive, and maybe on the other side of that you'll get to be fully yourself for the first time in your adult life. That's supposed to be comforting. It's supposed to be true. I tried to focus on work. Board emails, strategy documents, the Chen contract, which needed final review, but it all felt distant, like I was watching my own life through glass. Around 11 my phone rang, an unknown number, but with my father-in-law's area code. I almost didn't answer. Then curiosity won. Hello, Marcus. Diane's voice tight and controlled. We need to talk. Do we? Please, I'm asking you as Cameron's grandmother, as someone who cares about this family. What do you want, Diane? I want you to understand what you're doing to my daughter, to my husband, to this family. I leaned back in my chair and looked out at the city, at all the people moving through their lives with problems I couldn't imagine and joys I'd never know. What I'm doing, I said, carefully, is refusing to be treated as less than I am. If that's destroying your family, maybe your family was built on a foundation that couldn't handle the truth. Richard made a mistake. A mistake. And you're punishing him. Punishing all of us as if he committed some unforgivable sin. It wasn't a mistake, Diane. It was 18 years of mistakes. 18 years of systematic disrespect that you witnessed and said nothing about. You sat at those dinners and watched your husband belittle me, and you smiled and passed the potatoes as if it were normal, as if it were okay. We didn't realize. That's not an excuse. Not knowing doesn't erase the doing. And even now you're calling to defend him instead of acknowledging what really happened. Silence on the other end. Then Miranda is devastated. She's been crying since she got here. She doesn't know how to fix this. Maybe it's not fixable. Maybe some things once broken stay broken. You don't mean that. I don't know what I mean anymore, Diane. I just know I'm tired. Tired of accommodating. Tired of shrinking. Tired of being the person everyone else needs me to be instead of the person I actually am. But what about Cameron? Have you thought about him? About what this is doing to him? I think about Cameron constantly. I think about what I taught him by letting your husband treat me like crap for 18 years. I think about the lessons he learned watching me make myself small, and I think about how those lessons would have continued if I hadn't finally stood up for myself. So you're willing to destroy your marriage to prove a point? I'm not destroying anything. I'm just telling the truth. If the truth destroys my marriage, maybe the marriage was already destroyed and we were all just pretending it wasn't. Another long silence. Then Diane's voice again, softer now, almost vulnerable. Marcus, I'm asking you, begging you, give us a chance to make this. Come to dinner. Let Richard apologize properly. Let us show you that we can change. Richard had a chance to apologize properly. He came to my office yesterday, and he couldn't even articulate why he was apologizing. He's not sorry for what he did. He's sorry he got caught. People can change. People can change when they want to change. When they do the hard work of examining their own behavior and choosing differently. But you can't force that. You can't smooth it over with a family dinner and some Mia Ja and everyone performing forgiveness. So what do you want? What would it take for you to forgive him? The question hung there, genuine and impossible. I want him to understand, I said finally. Really understand. Not just intellectually acknowledge that he said some mean things, but really sit with the reality that he spent 18 years teaching my son that I wasn't man enough while I was the one supporting him financially. I want him to feel that, Diane, to really feel what that means, and I don't think he's capable of it. You think so little of us, don't you? I think you're people who've never had to examine your own behavior because you've always had the power to define reality. Richard decided I was weak, and everyone accepted it as truth. He decided he was the successful one, and no one questioned it. That's not malice, it's just privilege. The privilege of never having your version of the story challenged. And now you're challenging it. Now I'm just telling the truth. If that's a challenge to your story, that's on you. Diane was quiet for so long I thought she'd hung up. Then she really loves you, you know? Miranda, she's confused and hurt and doesn't know how to process all this, but she loves you. I think she loves the version of me she thought she married. I'm less convinced she loves the person I actually am. Give her time to figure that out. I'm giving her all the time she needs, but Diane, I'm not going to shrink myself to make that figuring out easier. I'm done performing smallness to keep other people comfortable. I understand, she said, though I wasn't sure she did. You'll at least think about dinner. About giving us a chance. I'll think about it for you, because sometimes small kindnesses are all you have left to offer. She hung up and I sat with the phone in my hand, wondering when kindness had become indistinguishable from a lie. Around noon, Jennifer buzzed in and came in with food I hadn't ordered. A sandwich, fruit, the kind of meal someone brings when they're worried you'll forget to eat. You're hovering? I said, I'm caretaking. There's a difference. She set the food down. Eat. And then I need you to make a decision on the Singapore contract. They want an answer by end of day. What's to decide? The numbers work. Tell them yes. The numbers work if you're willing to travel there quarterly for the first year. That's a lot of long flights, a lot of time away from home. Given everything that's going on with your family. My family is falling apart, whether I'm in Singapore or sitting at home staring at the walls. At least in Singapore, I'll be doing something productive. Jennifer gave me a look that suggested I was being an idiot, but she didn't say it out loud. Okay, I'll tell them yes. But Marcus, you can't outrun this. I'm not running, I'm working. There's a difference, isn't there? Because from where I'm sitting it looks like you're about to bury yourself and work the same way you buried yourself in accommodation for 18 years. Different strategy, same avoidance. That's not fair. It's completely fair. You're good at extremes, Marcus. You're either completely selfless or you're completely self-reliant. You're either making yourself invisible or you're working 80-hour weeks. What you're not good at is the middle ground, being present, being vulnerable, actually feeling the hard things instead of strategizing around them. I wanted to argue, but she was right. I'd spent 18 years solving the problem of Richard Blackwood by making myself small. Now I was about to solve the problem of my imploding marriage by making myself busy. So what do you suggest? I suggest you sit with the discomfort. Let yourself feel it. Stop trying to fix or optimize your way out of grief. Just be sad. Be angry. Be whatever you actually are instead of whatever you think you should be. That sounds terrible. It probably will be, but it's better than spending the next 18 years running from this the way you spent the last 18 years accommodating it. She left, taking her uncomfortable wisdom with her, and I sat with the sandwich I didn't want to eat, and I thought about all the ways I'd spent my life avoiding the actual experience of being human. Cameron stopped by the office after school, appearing in my doorway, looking uncertain. Hey, I said. Everything okay? Yeah, just can we talk? Of course. Come in. Close the door. He sat down and immediately seemed uncomfortable, like he had something to say, but wasn't sure how to say it. Mom called me during lunch. He said finally, she's really upset, Dad. Like scary upset. What did she say? She just kept asking if I was mad at her, if I blamed her for everything falling apart. She was crying and saying she'd failed me as a mother and she didn't know how to fix any of this. Guilt twisted in my chest. This was the collateral damage Jennifer had warned about. Not just my pain and Miranda's, but Cameron's, caught in the middle of two parents who were trying to do the right thing and somehow making everything worse. What did you tell her? I told her I wasn't mad, that I loved her, that everyone was just figuring things out. He paused, but that wasn't entirely true. What do you mean? I am kind of mad at her, not for the original stuff. Like I get why she didn't stand up to Grandpa, why she didn't ask about your job. I get that she was trying to keep the peace, but I'm mad that even now, even after everything, she's at Grandpa's house instead of at home with you. She chose them over you again. The observation was so sharp, so completely accurate that it took my breath away. She's confused. She needs space to process. She needs to decide who she's married to, you or her parents. And the fact that it's taking her this long to decide tells you everything you need to know. That's not fair to her. Why do you keep defending her? Why do you keep making excuses for people who don't make excuses for you? The question hung there, challenging and uncomfortable and absolutely right. Because, I said slowly, because I love her, because we have a history. Because marriage means giving people grace when they get it wrong. But when do you get grace? Dad, when does someone give you the benefit of the doubt? When does someone stand up for you instead of you having to stand up for yourself while also defending everyone else? I didn't have an answer. Or I did, but it was just never. And that seemed too bleak to say out loud to my 16-year-old son. I'm okay, Cam. I promise. This is hard, but I'm okay. You're not okay. You look like hell. You're sleeping at your office. I can tell because you're wearing the same shirt you wore yesterday. Mom's gone and you're pretending it's fine, and everyone's treating you like you're the problem because you finally stood up for yourself. Language, I said automatically. Then I laughed because it was absurd to be policing his language when everything else was chaos. Cameron smiled too briefly, then got serious again. Can I ask you something? Anything. If Mom can't figure this out, if she decides she can't be married to who you really are, will you be okay? The question was so vulnerable, so genuinely worried, that I had to be honest. Eventually, yes. It'll hurt like hell for a while, but eventually I'll be okay, because staying in a marriage where I have to hide who I am would hurt worse in the long run. Good, because I need you to be okay. I need at least one parent who's actually dealing with reality instead of hiding from it. He left soon after, heading for a study group, and I sat in my office watching the sunset over the city and thinking about Cameron's words. When does someone give you the benefit of the doubt? The answer, I realized, was that I had to give it to myself. I had to be the one who stood up for me, who valued me, who refused to accept less than I deserved, because if I kept waiting for someone else to do it, I'd be waiting forever. My phone buzzed. A text from Miranda. Can we talk tomorrow? I want to explain some things. I looked at the message for a long time, then typed, okay, caught at 10. The place on 5th. Okay, thanks. I put the phone down and looked out at the city lights beginning to flicker on, each one representing someone else's drama, someone else's heartbreak, someone else's attempt to navigate the impossible math of human connection. Tomorrow I'd talk to Miranda. Tomorrow I'd listen to whatever explanation she'd constructed, whatever realization she'd come to while hiding at her parents' house. But tonight I would just sit with the emptiness, feel it, stop running from it or fixing it or optimizing it. I would just be alone in my office, in my life, in my truth. And maybe that was enough for now. The coffee shop on 5th was neutral ground, not ours, not theirs, just a place that served decent lattes and had booths in the back where you could have conversations that required privacy. I got there 15 minutes early, ordered a black coffee I didn't really want, and sat facing the door because some part of me needed to see Miranda coming. I needed those few seconds to brace myself for whatever version of her walked in. She arrived at exactly 10 because Miranda was never late for important things. She looked tired, the kind of tired sleep doesn't fix, that lives in your bones and shows in the way you carry yourself. She was wearing jeans and a sweater I'd bought her 2 Christmases ago, and I wondered if that was intentional, if she'd chosen it as a signal that she remembered us, remembered the good things. Or maybe it was just clean and she grabbed it without thinking. Hi, she said, sliding into the booth across from me. Hi. We sat there for a moment in the particular awkwardness of people who've shared a bed for 18 years, suddenly unsure how to occupy the same space. Thank you for meeting me, she said finally. Of course. A waiter appeared, took her order cappuccino no foam, the same thing she'd been ordering since I knew her, and disappeared, leaving us alone with the conversation we'd come to have. I've been doing a lot of thinking, Miranda began. Her hands wrapped around the menu she wasn't reading. About us, about my father, about everything that's happened. Okay. And I realized something I should have realized a long time ago, but was too comfortable to see. She looked up at me and her eyes were red-rimmed, but clear, focused in a way they hadn't been for days. I've been treating you like you were lucky to be part of my family, instead of recognizing that my family was lucky to have you. I let my father set the terms of reality and I never questioned it, because questioning it would have meant confronting him. And her voice broke. I wasn't brave enough to do that. The admission hung between us, vulnerable and honest. Thank you for saying that, I said carefully. But here's the thing I'm wrestling with, Marcus. Here's what I've been trying to figure out for the last 3 days while I've been at my parents' house sleeping in my childhood bedroom, like I'm 16 again. What's that? Why didn't you tell me not just about the company, about your success, but about how my father was making you feel? Why did you let it go on for so long? Why didn't you trust me enough to be honest? The question was fair, and I knew it was coming. I'd been preparing for it since she'd texted me yesterday. Because, I said slowly, choosing my words carefully, telling you would have forced you to choose. Between your father and me, between the family you grew up in and the family we were building. And I didn't want to put you in that position. So you sacrificed yourself instead. I thought I was being noble. I thought I was protecting you. But you were also protecting yourself, weren't you? Because if you told me the truth and I chose my father anyway, you'd have your answer about what I really valued. And you weren't ready for that answer. The observation was so sharp, so uncomfortably accurate that I felt it like a physical blow. Maybe I admitted. Maybe I was afraid of what you'd choose. So we've both been cowards, haven't we? Me for not standing up to my father, you for not trusting me enough to handle the truth. Both of us choosing comfort over honesty. Her cappuccino arrived, buying us a moment to breathe, to reset, to prepare for wherever this conversation was going next. I talked to Cameron yesterday. She said adding sugar she didn't need just to have something to do with her hands. He's angry with me. He told me, but he'll forgive you. Miranda, he loves you, but he respects you. And I'm realizing now that those are two different things. And maybe I've had his love all along, but I've been taking his respect for granted. She stirred her coffee, watching the spoon move in circles. He asked me why I was at my parents' house instead of at home with you, and I didn't have a good answer. I said I needed space to think, but what I really needed was for my parents to tell me I was right, that you were being unreasonable, that this was all your fault for making a big deal out of one comment. And did they tell you that? My father did. My mother was quieter. She kept saying things like Marcus has a point, and maybe we haven't been fair to him. It made my father furious. They've been fighting, Marcus. Terrible, doors slamming fights about you, about their marriage, about things I think have been buried for years and are finally coming to the surface because you pulled on one thread and the whole thing started to unravel. I sat with the idea that my honesty hadn't just affected my marriage, but was now affecting theirs, sending ripples through a family system that had been carefully balanced on lies and assumptions. I'm sorry, I said, though I wasn't entirely sure I meant it. Don't be. My mother said something yesterday that I can't stop thinking about. She said, you know the saddest thing? I've been married to your father for 40 years, and I've spent 35 of them making myself smaller so he could feel bigger. And watching Marcus finally refuse to do that made me realize I could have stopped any time. I just didn't. Miranda's eyes were full of tears now, and I reached across the table to take her hand before I could stop myself. She held on tight. I don't want to be my mother, she whispered. I don't want to wake up in 20 years and realize I spent my whole marriage accommodating someone's insecurity instead of building something real. Then don't be. But I don't know how. I don't know how to be married to you now that I know who you really are. I don't know how not to defer to my father when that's what I've been doing my whole life. I don't know how to trust myself when my own judgment has been so wrong about so many things. The vulnerability in her voice was real, raw. The kind of honesty that comes from actually sitting with hard truths instead of running from them. Can I tell you something? I said, please. When you left 3 days ago, when you chose to go to your parents' house instead of staying at home, I was devastated. But I was also relieved because it clarified something I'd been avoiding, the reality that maybe you're not capable of being married to the person I actually am. And knowing that, as painful as it is better than spending another 18 years wondering. Are you saying you want a divorce? I'm saying I want the truth. I want a marriage where both people show up fully, where no one is hiding or performing or sacrificing themselves for a false peace. And if that's not possible, if you can't be married to me without needing me to be smaller, then yes, maybe divorce is the answer. She pulled her hand back, wrapped both hands around her coffee cup as if she needed something solid to hold on to. I've been thinking about that too. About divorce, about what it would look like to be single, to co-parent Cameron, to divide 18 years of shared life. She looked up at me. And the thing is, Marcus, I don't want that. I don't want to be divorced, but I also don't know if I can give you what you need. What do you think I need? A wife who sees you clearly, who values you properly, who stands up for you the way you've been standing up for yourself these last few days. A partner who's strong enough to be married to someone strong instead of needing them to be weak so she can feel adequate. That's exactly what I need. I know. And I don't know if I can be that person. I want to be. God. Marcus, I want to be so badly, but wanting and being are different things. We sat in the weight of that admission, this terrible honesty that was both healing and destroying us simultaneously. My therapist, she began, then stopped at my look of surprise. I made an appointment yesterday, emergency session. I needed help processing all this, and I couldn't keep dumping it on my mother, who's processing her own revelation about her marriage. I'm glad you're seeing someone. She said something that hit hard. She asked me if Marcus had told you the truth from the beginning about his success, about financially supporting your father, about how your father's comments made him feel. What would you have done? And I realized I didn't know. I wanted to say I would have stood up for you. I would have confronted my father. I would have chosen you. But honestly, I might not have. I might have done exactly what I've been doing, making excuses for him, asking you to be patient, prioritizing his feelings over yours because it's easier, because my father's love has always felt conditional, like I had to earn it. I had to be perfect. I had to never disappoint him. And your love? She paused with tears running down her face. Your love felt unconditional, like I could mess up, and you'd still be there. So I took advantage of that. I made you do the emotional heavy lifting because I knew you would. I made you be the flexible one because I knew I could be. The self-awareness in her words was both beautiful and heartbreaking. That's not a good foundation for a marriage, I said softly. I know. My therapist said the same thing. She said healthy relationships require both people to show up with equal strength, equal vulnerability, equal willingness to do the hard work. And I haven't been doing that. I've been letting you do all the hard work while I coasted on your willingness to accommodate. So where does that leave us? Miranda looked at me with eyes that had seen too much in too short a time, that were trying to hold truth and hope and grief all at once. I don't know. I want to fight for us. I want to become the person who can be married to you properly. But Marcus, I need time. Real time. Not 3 days at my parents' house time, but months of therapy and hard work and figuring out who I am outside of my father's expectations. Okay, I'm not going anywhere. I mean, I'm here in our house living my life, but I'm not dating anyone else, not filing divorce papers, not giving up on us. If you need time to do your work, take it. I'll be here when you're ready. What if I'm never ready? What if I do the work and I realize I still can't be what you need? Then at least we'll know, at least we'll have tried. At least we won't spend the rest of our lives wondering what might have been if we'd just been honest. She reached across the table and took my hand again. And this time I let myself feel it. The warmth, the familiarity, the 18 years of history in that one small gesture. I love you, she said. I need you to know that. Even if I've done a terrible job of showing it. Even if I've failed you in all these ways. I love you, Marcus. I've always loved you. I know, and I love you too. But Miranda, love isn't enough. Not on its own. We also need respect and honesty and equal partnership. We need both people to show up fully, and until we have that, love is it's just potential. It's not a real relationship. When did you get so wise? I've had a lot of time to think these last few days, a lot of empty house and sleepless nights and conversations with myself about what I want my life to actually look like. And what do you want? I want to be seen. I want to be valued. I want to stop playing versions of myself that make other people comfortable. I want to be fully myself and have that be enough. Not too much, not threatening, just enough. You deserve that. You also deserve to be with someone who doesn't need you to be small. Your father's conditioned you to think you have to earn love by being perfect, by never challenging him, by always accommodating. But that's not love, Miranda. That's just control disguised as family obligation. She nodded, slowly absorbing this, and I could see her trying to hold on to it, even as the old patterns tried to pull her back. My mother's moving out, she said suddenly. Of my father's. She asked me this morning if she could stay with us for a while in the guest room. I told her I needed to ask you first, since I'm not even living there right now. The revelation was so unexpected that for a moment I couldn't process it. Your mother is leaving your father. Not for good. She said she needs space to figure out what 40 years of marriage have done to her. To figure out who she is without him telling her who to be. She said, watching all this unfold, watching you stand up for yourself, watching me struggle, watching my father's carefully constructed image crumble, made her realize she's been living a half-life, that she's been so busy being Richard Blackwood's wife that she forgot to be Diane. That's huge. I know, my father is devastated. He keeps saying everyone's overreacting, that one bad comment shouldn't destroy 3 relationships. But my mom said it wasn't one comment. It was 40 years of comments. 40 years of subtle diminishment that she'd normalized until she saw it reflected back through what he did to you. So should I tell her yes, she can stay? I thought about it, about Diana, in my guest room, about what her presence would mean, about the strangeness of giving sanctuary to the mother-in-law whose husband I'd just fired. Yes, I said finally. Tell her yes. She's welcome to stay as long as she needs. Miranda smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her in days. Thank you. She'll appreciate that. She's pretty great when she's not busy managing my father's ego. I've always liked your mother. I know she likes you too. She told me yesterday she'd always admired how patient you were with my father. How kind. She said she knew you were being condescended to, and she felt terrible about it, but she didn't know how to stop it without making things worse. She could have said something. She could have, but she was caught in the same trap I was, choosing the path of least resistance because confrontation seemed impossible. We finished our coffee in an easier silence. The tension from the beginning of the conversation relaxed into something more like resolution, or at least understanding. So what now? Miranda asked finally. Now you do your work, I do mine. Cameron survives his parents' drama and hopefully learns something useful about honesty and boundaries. Your mom figures out who she is. Your dad does some real self-examination, or he doesn't, and we see what's left standing when the dust settles. That's terrifying. Yes, but it's also honest. And I'll take honest and terrifying over comfortable and fake any day. She stood gathering her purse and jacket, paused at the edge of the booth. Can I hug you? Of course. She came around the table, and I stood, and we hugged in the middle of a coffee shop on 5th Street. Two people who'd spent 18 years building a life that turned out to be built on sand, trying to figure out if there was solid ground somewhere underneath. I'm going to fix this, she whispered into my shoulder. I'm going to become the person who can be married to you properly. I promise. Don't promise. Just try. That's all any of us can do. She pulled away, wiped her eyes, tried to smile through the tears. I'll call you later. About logistics, about your mom, about everything. Okay. She left, and I watched her walk to her car through the window, and I thought about promises and potential and the difference between wanting to change and actually doing the work to change. Then I paid the bill, left a generous tip, and walked back to my car under a sky that was finally clear, finally blue, finally done with the rain. Maybe that was a sign, or maybe it was just weather. Either way, I'd take it. Diane moved in on a Thursday afternoon, arriving with 2 suitcases and an expression that vacillated between determination and terror. I helped her carry her things up to the guest room. The same room Miranda had slept in 3 nights ago, already becoming a way station for the Blackwood women, figuring out who they were without the men who defined them. Thank you, she said, setting her smaller bag on the bed for letting me stay. I know this is awkward, doesn't even begin to cover it. Your family, you're welcome here. She laughed, but it was bitter. I'm family. After everything Richard did, after I sat there and watched him do it, I'm still family. Yes, you're still family. Complicit family, maybe, but family all the same. She sat on the edge of the bed and looked at me with eyes that were Miranda's eyes, the same shape, same color, but older, carrying 40 years of accommodation. I'm proud of you, she said, for standing up for yourself, for telling the truth, for refusing to make yourself small anymore. Why didn't you ever stand up for me? Why didn't you ever stand up for yourself? The question came out harder than I intended, but she didn't flinch because I was scared. Scared that if I challenged Richard, if I stopped managing his ego, he would leave, or worse, he would stay, but punish me with coldness, with withdrawal, with the cruelty that comes from withholding love you've spent years earning. She smoothed the comforter with her hand. Yes, I became an expert at accommodation, at softening his edges, at translating his harshness into something more palatable, and somewhere along the way I forgot that wasn't actually my job. What changed? Why now seeing Miranda these last few days? Watching her wrestle with the same choice I've been making for 40 years, whether to challenge the man she loves or accommodate him to keep the peace. And I realized that if I didn't do something, she would become me. She would spend the next 20 years making herself smaller and smaller until she disappeared entirely. Miranda's stronger than you think. Maybe, but strength without practice is just potential. She needs to see someone model what it looks like to choose yourself, even when it's scary, even when you don't know what comes next. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Two people who'd loved the same difficult man for decades, finally seeing each other clearly. Richard's not doing well, she said quietly. Ever since this all happened, he barely eats. He sits in his study staring into space. Yesterday, I found him going through old photos of when Miranda was young, of when his business was still successful, of before everything started to fall apart. That's supposed to make me feel guilty, isn't it? It's supposed to help you understand. Richard spent his whole life defining himself by external measures: success, wealth, power, respect. And now all of that has been revealed as either gone or false, and he doesn't know who he is underneath. He has to face the fact that he's been cruel to someone who was helping him, that he's alienated his daughter, that his wife is leaving because she's tired of shrinking. That's a lot to face. It is, and I don't know if he's capable of it. I don't know if he can do the work of really examining himself instead of just waiting for everyone to forgive him so life can go back to normal. There is no normal to go back to. I know, but Richard doesn't, not yet. He still thinks this is fixable with the right combination of apology and time. He doesn't understand that some things once broken become something new. They don't go back to what they were. That night, Cameron came home to find his grandmother unpacking in the guest room, and he stopped short in the doorway. "Grandma, what are you doing here? Living with your father for a little while figuring some things out." Cameron looked at me in confusion, and I motioned for him to come downstairs. In the kitchen, I explained about Diane leaving Richard, about 40 years of accommodation finally reaching a breaking point, about how revelation works in ripples, affecting everyone it touches. "So basically," Cameron said, processing, "you standing up to Grandpa didn't just affect you and Mom, it affected their marriage too. Apparently that's kind of heavy. Yeah, but also kind of amazing. Like you didn't just save yourself, maybe you saved Grandma too. I hadn't thought of it that way, as salvation instead of destruction. But maybe that was the thing about the truth. It destroyed and saved simultaneously. It burned away the false so the real could breathe." "Maybe," I said. Cameron took an apple from the fruit bowl and bit into it thoughtfully. "Mom called. She wants to have dinner. The three of us tomorrow night. She said she has things she wants to say to both of us." "How do you feel about that?" "Nervous, but also ready. I think she's really doing the work, Dad. Like real work, not just saying she's sorry, but trying to actually change. We'll see." "You don't believe her?" "I want to believe her, but I've learned that wanting something and it being true are different things. We'll have dinner, we'll listen to what she has to say, and then we'll see what's real and what's just wishful thinking." Cameron nodded, satisfied with this measured response, and went upstairs to do homework. I stood in my kitchen, my house, my life, my truth, and thought about all the ways honesty reshapes reality. Diane emerged an hour later, having settled into the guest room, and we made dinner together in an easy silence. 3 days ago, this would have been unthinkable, cooking with my mother-in-law while my wife lived somewhere else. While her husband sat alone in a house that suddenly felt too big, while all of our carefully constructed family dynamics rearranged themselves into shapes none of us recognized. But here we were doing the unthinkable and surviving it. The restaurant Miranda chose was Italian, the same place we'd been on our first anniversary. A detail that was not lost on me. She was trying to invoke nostalgia, or maybe just reminding us that we'd been good once, that there was something worth fighting for, buried under all the recent rubble. She was already seated when Cameron and I arrived, wearing a blue dress I'd always liked, with her hair down in a way that made her look younger, more vulnerable. She stood when she saw us, uncertain whether to hug or wave or just sit back down. Cameron solved it by hugging her first tight and long, and I watched my wife's face crumple with relief that her son still loved her, still chose her despite everything. When it was my turn, she hugged me too, but differently, carefully, as if I were something breakable or she was. "Thank you for coming," she said as we sat down. "Of course," I replied, because what else was there to say? The waiter appeared, took drink orders, disappeared again into the comfortable chaos of Friday night dinner service. Miranda's hands were trembling slightly as she unfolded her napkin. "I've been practicing what to say," she began. "All week I've written speeches, rehearsed in mirrors, talked it through with my therapist until she probably wanted to charge me double. But now that you're here, it all feels insufficient." "Just say what's true," Cameron offered quietly. "That's what Dad always says. Just say what's true." Miranda smiled at him gratefully, then took a deep breath and looked at us both. "I've been a coward, not just recently, but for most of our marriage. I let my father define reality because it was easier than challenging him. I let him diminish you, Marcus, because defending you would have required me to risk his approval. And I've been so focused on earning his love that I forgot I already had yours, that I'd always had yours, and I treated it like it was worthless because it came so easily." She paused, and I could see her fighting back tears, forcing herself to continue. "My therapist asked me what I was afraid of. What would happen if I stood up to my father? If I chose you over him? And I realized I was afraid he'd stop loving me, that without his approval I'd be no one, that I would somehow cease to exist without his validation. Mom, Cameron began, but she held up a hand. Let me finish, please, because this is important. She looked at me now, really looked at me with eyes that were finally seeing clearly. But watching my mother leave him this week, watching her choose herself for the first time in 40 years, made me realize that's not love. What my father gives isn't love. It's conditional approval based on whether you're performing the way he wants. And I've spent my whole life performing the perfect daughter, the perfect wife, the perfect everything. And in doing that, I stopped being real. So what now? I asked gently. Now I get real. I stop performing. I stand up to my father not to punish him, but to set boundaries I should have learned decades ago. I show up in our marriage as an equal partner instead of someone you have to constantly accommodate. I become the mother Cameron deserves, one who models strength instead of accommodation. That sounds good, Miranda. But how do I know it's real? How do I know this isn't just another performance? She reached into her purse and pulled out a folder, an echo of the folder I'd pulled out that night, the one that had started everything. I wrote my father a letter telling him everything I've never said about how his need to feel superior hurt me, how watching him treat you badly hurt our family, how I'm done choosing his comfort over my integrity. She slid the folder across the table to me. I wanted you to read it before I send it to make sure I'm not softening it, not making excuses, not falling back into old patterns. I opened the folder and read. Cameron read over my shoulder. The letter was 6 pages single-spaced, unflinching. It was honest in ways I'd never seen Miranda be honest. It was boundaried and clear and strong and sad. All at once. It was real. Send it, I said. You think it's okay? I think it's perfect. Cameron nodded in agreement. It's really good, Mom, really honest. She smiled, and for the first time in weeks it reached her eyes. Okay, I'll send it tonight. Our food came, and we ate like a family again. Not the family we'd been playing roles and avoiding the truth, but something new, something uncertain, but honest, something broken, but rebuilding. After dessert, as we were walking to our cars, Miranda touched my arm. I'm not asking to come home yet. I know I need to earn that. But Marcus, can we try? Can we see if we can build something real out of all these broken pieces? I looked at her, this woman I'd loved for 18 years, who was finally becoming someone I could respect, and I felt something shift.